The journey begins at the edge of the world, where the high mountain peaks meet the swirling mist of the heavens. This is the story of the Destined One, a silent monkey warrior who carries the weight of an ancient legacy in his blood. This experience is defined by the stone and the spirit, where the atmosphere is one of ancient echoes and lingering myths. This part of the history is a story of the fallen sage, a realization that even the greatest hero of the heavens, the great sage Sun Wukong, could be brought down by the chains of destiny. The air here is thin and cold, smelling of mountain pine and old incense. The sound of the wind through the jagged rocks is a low and mournful flute, making the world feel like it is waiting for a spark to reignite the fire of the past. The walk through the lower reaches of Huguo Mountain is a story of ruined beauty and shaded memories. You see the remains of a paradise that was once filled with laughing monkeys and crystal waterfalls, now guarded by the cold stone soldiers of the celestial court. This is the era of the shattered crown, where the atmosphere is one of quiet decay and hidden strength. The Destined One moves with a calculated and heavy grace, his staff hitting the ground with a steady and hollow thud. This part of the history is a realization that to reclaim the six senses of the great sage, one must first walk through the wreckage of what was lost. The sound of the water hitting the pools below is a constant and rhythmic drip, a sign that the life of the mountain is still pulsing beneath the surface. As the journey moves toward the Black Wind Mountain, the atmosphere shifts to one of damp shadows and burning embers. This is a land of deep forests and hidden temples, where the trees grow so thick they block out the sun. This experience is defined by the scent of wet moss and old char, where the atmosphere is one of tense focus and spiritual weight. This part of the history is a story of the burnt temple, a realization that the greed of man and the pride of demons often leave behind nothing but ash. You see the black scorch marks on the wooden pillars of the Guanyin temple, a reminder of the fire that once consumed the halls. The air is thick with the taste of smoke and humidity, making the forest feel like a living barrier between the warrior and the truth. The walk through the wolf forest is a story of the predator's path. You encounter the bull-headed guards and the swift wolf soldiers who patrol the narrow trails. This is a moment of raw and primal energy, where the atmosphere is one of adrenaline and shifting shadows. The Destined One must use the flow of the staff to parry the heavy blows of the mountain's guardians. The sound of the metal hitting the wood is a sharp and ringing note, echoing through the trees and alerting the forest that the seeker has arrived. This part of the history is a realization that strength is not just about the strike, but about the balance of the breath. You feel the softness of the leaves under your boots and the hardness of the iron in your hand, a feeling of total and grounded readiness. Deep in the mountain, the group encounters the Black Wind King, a massive bear demon who was once a friend to the monks. The fight is a story of the cyclone and the stone. The atmosphere is loud, violent, and dark, as the king turns into a swirling cloud of black smoke that tears through the temple courtyard. This is the trial of the first sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of high velocity and focused will. The destined one must time his movements to the rhythm of the wind, striking when the shadow becomes solid. The sound of the crashing masonry and the roar of the bear is a powerful and drowning chaos, making the world feel like it is being torn apart. When the beast is finally brought low, the atmosphere shifts to one of sudden and heavy silence, a realization that the first piece of the puzzle has been recovered. With the first relic in hand, the journey continues toward the Yellow Wind Ridge, a place of dry sands and golden dust. This is a land of sun-bleached bone and ancient stone, where the atmosphere is one of blinding heat and hidden danger. This part of the history is a story of the singing sands, a realization that the desert hides its secrets beneath the dunes. You see the remains of the headless monks who once played their instruments to keep the wind at bay, their music now replaced by the hiss of the sand against the rocks. The air is dry and carries the scent of dust and old parchment. The sound of the wind through the canyons is a high and screaming note, making the ridge feel like a fortress of the sun. The walk through the Sandgate village is a story of the starving rat and the buried king. You encounter the rat demons who have tunneled deep into the earth, their eyes glowing red in the dark. This is a moment of claustrophobic tension and quick reflexes. The atmosphere is dusty and dim as you navigate the narrow alleys and the underground chambers. You feel the grit of the sand in your hair and the heat of the stones through your soles. This part of the history is a realization that even the smallest creatures can become monsters when they are consumed by hunger. The sound of the scratching claws against the floor is a steady and nervous beat, signaling that the earth itself is watching your every move. Deep in the desert, they find the Crouching Tiger Temple, a place where the stairs are stained with the blood of the sacrifices. The atmosphere is holy and gory, a realization that some gods require a heavy price for their protection. This is a story of the flowing blood, where the atmosphere becomes one of heavy mystery and metallic scent. The fight with the Tiger Vanguard is a moment of sleek and lethal power, as the beast moves with the grace of water and the strength of a mountain. The sound of the blood splashing against the stone is a muffled and heavy thud, making the temple feel like a slaughterhouse of the soul. When the tiger is defeated, the path to the Yellow Wind Great Sage is opened, a realization that the second relic is near. The experience in the desert ends with a great golden storm that swallows the entire ridge. The dust of the sand has led to a sovereignty of the gale. The destined one carries the weight of a first relic and the thirst of the sun. The atmosphere is one of exhausted and ready resolve, a realization that the journey is only just beginning. The focus would now shift to the snowy peaks of the north, as the history prepared to enter the frozen pagoda and face the trials of the third relic, the final legacy of the Black Wind Mountain and the Yellow Wind Ridge is a story of the awakening of the seeker. You have seen the warrior walk through the fire and the sand to find the fragments of a soul. You have felt the sting of the wind and the weight of the staff. As the golden dust settles and the first snowflakes of the mountain appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the step on the stone, leaving behind the forest for a world of ice, thunder, and the long road toward the great sage. The journey moves away from the parched sands and into the biting cold of the New West, where the mountains are draped in a heavy, permanent blanket of snow. This is the region of the North Mountain, a place where the air is so crisp it feels like breathing in shattered glass. This experience is defined by the silence of the frost, where the atmosphere is one of eerie stillness and hidden spirits. This part of the history is a story of the white path, a realization that the path to the heavens is often paved with ice. The air here carries the faint, cold scent of plum blossoms and frozen pine. The sound of the destined one's boots on the fresh snow is a soft and rhythmic crunch, a lonely beat in a world that seems to have stopped breathing. The light here is pale and blue, reflecting off the jagged cliffs and making the world feel like a colossal grave of ice. As the warrior ascends the mountain, the atmosphere shifts from natural cold to spiritual dread. He reaches the gates of the pagoda realm, a massive, vertical prison built into the side of a cliff, where the souls of the wicked and the unfortunate are kept in eternal chains. This is the era of the Wailing Walls, where the atmosphere is one of heavy despair and metallic echoes. The pagoda is lit by flickering green lanterns and the faint glow of magical seals that pulse like a slow, dying heart. The sound of the wind howling through the iron bars is a high and mournful scream, a realization that this place was built to break the will of any who enter. The destined one moves through the narrow walkways, his staff held tight as the cold iron of the chains rattles in the darkness around him. This part of the history is a story of the prison of the mind, where every step forward feels like walking through a thick, invisible fog of sorrow. Deep within the levels of the pagoda, the atmosphere becomes distorted and pulsing. Every few minutes, a great bell tolls from an unknown source, and the world turns into a vision of gray and blood. This is the trial of the voice, where the atmosphere becomes one of nausea and spiritual weight. The destined one's vision blurs, and the demons of the prison become faster and more aggressive. He must lean on his staff and focus his breath to keep his mind from shattering. The sound of the chanting voices of the captains is a deep and vibrating hum that seems to come from inside his own skull. This is a moment of internal combat, a realization that the greatest enemy in the New West is not the cold, but the loss of oneself. He navigates the blood-stained floors, feeling the icy dampness of the stone through his fur, a feeling of total and isolated struggle. At the top of the frozen ridges, the group encounters the captain of the Lotus Manifest, a being of pure spirit and mechanical precision. The fight is a story of the beam and the staff, The atmosphere is cold, electric, and blinding, as the captain fires streaks of white light that melt the snow and crack the rocks. This is the trial of the third sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of high precision and frantic movement. The destined one must warp and dodge between the pillars of the temple, using the flow of the frost to find an opening. The sound of the magic exploding against the stone is a sharp and deafening crack, making the mountaintop feel like a forge of light. When the spirit is finally dissipated, the atmosphere shifts to a quiet and sparkling peace, a realization that another piece of the great sage has been recovered from the ice. Leaving the prison behind, the journey leads to the Temple of the Bitter Lake, a place where the water is so cold it has turned into a sheet of black glass. The atmosphere is vast and freezing, a realization that the beauty of the New West hides a lethal and deep maw. This part of the history is a story of the frozen dragon, where the atmosphere is one of crystalline wonder and primordial fear. You see a massive, white-scaled dragon resting on the ice, its breath creating clouds of frost that hang in the air like ghosts. The destined one must walk across the slippery surface, his movements slow and calculated to avoid waking the beast. The sound of the ice groaning under his weight is a low and threatening moan, a sign that the lake itself is a living, breathing entity. The walk through the Valley of Ecstasy is a story of the false paradise. You encounter monks who have lost their minds to the cold, their prayers turned into hollow and rhythmic chants that echo through the canyons. This is a moment of religious decay and spiritual hunger. The atmosphere is pale and ghostly, as the white trees drip with icicles that look like frozen tears. You feel the numbness in the fingers and the sharpness of the wind against your face. This part of the history is a realization that even the pursuit of enlightenment can become a trap when the heart is frozen. The sound of the wooden fish drums being struck by the mad monks is a steady and maddening beat, signaling that you are entering the heart of a golden and cold illusion. Deep in the valley, they find the new Thunderclap Temple, a massive structure of gold and red that sits atop the highest peak. The atmosphere is grand and oppressive, a realization that the power of the heavens has been twisted by the Yellowbrow, a disciple who believes he is more divine than the gods themselves. This is a story of the false Buddha, where the atmosphere becomes one of blinding gold and moral rot. The final battle in the temple is a moment of cosmic scale and heavy iron, as the world shifts between the temple of gold and the belly of a giant fish. The sound of the great gongs being struck is a drowning and powerful roar, making the warrior feel small and fleeting against the weight of the false divinity. The experience in the New West ends with the destined one standing on the balcony of the temple, looking out over the endless fields of snow. The ice of the mountain has led to a sovereignty of the frost. He carries the weight of a third relic and the chill of the pagoda. The atmosphere is one of quiet and frozen resolve, a realization that the path to the sage is becoming more dangerous with every step. The focus would now shift to the sunless caverns of the south. As the history prepared to enter the webbed hollow and face the sisters of the spider, the final legacy of the pagoda realm and the bitter lake is a story of the hardening of the soul. You have seen the warrior survive the voices in the dark and the dragon on the ice. You have felt the bite of the frost and the weight of the chains. As the white sun sets over the temple and the first shadows of the hollow appear in the distance, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and frozen resolution in the breath in the cold, leaving behind the snow for a world of silk, shadows, and the deep secrets of the earth. The journey leaves the freezing heights of the north for the humid, lightless depths of the Pansilk Ridge. This is a place where the air is heavy with the scent of damp earth, rotting leaves, and the cloying sweetness of orchid nectar. This experience is defined by the tangling of the thread, where the atmosphere is one of suffocating stillness and hidden eyes. This part of the history is a story of the webbed hollow, a realization that the earth itself can become a trap if one is not careful where they step. The ground here is soft and spongy, covered in a layer of white silk that looks like fallen snow, but feels like sticky iron. The sound of the world is reduced to a low and constant rustle as thousands of tiny legs move within the shadows of the cave walls. The light is a dim, sickly green, filtered through the thick canopy of trees and the translucent webs that hang like heavy curtains from the ceiling. As the warrior descends into the hollow, the atmosphere shifts from natural dark to ancient malice. He enters the upper hollow, a series of winding tunnels where the walls are lined with cocoons that pulse with a faint, rhythmic life. This is the era of the Spider Sisters, where the atmosphere is one of tense beauty and predatory grace. You see the sisters, beings of half woman and half spider, who move through the silk with a fluid and silent lethality. This part of the history is a story of the lost marriage, a realization that even monsters carry the grief of a life they were forced to leave behind. The sound of their voices is a soft and melancholy hiss, echoing through the stone chambers like a memory of a song. The destined one moves with a low and focused center, his staff clearing the sticky threads as the eyes in the dark follow his every movement. Deep within the mid-hollow, the atmosphere becomes hot and fetid. The tunnels open into massive caverns where the floors are covered in pools of stagnant water and the bones of those who wandered too far from the path. This is the trial of the second daughter, where the atmosphere becomes one of venomous speed and dark instinct. The air is thick with the taste of bitter poison, making the throat feel tight and the head feel light. The destined one must use the agility of the ape to navigate the narrow ledges while avoiding the bursts of purple silk that shoot from the shadows. The sound of the water dripping from the stalactites is a steady and hollow plonk, a sign that the mountain is slowly weeping into the dark. This part of the history is a realization that in the hollow, patience is the only shield against the hunger of the brood. At the heart of the lower hollow, the group encounters the court of the Spider Queen, a place of decaying splendor where the webs are woven into the shape of a royal palace. The fight is a story of the swarm and the sage. The atmosphere is chaotic, crowded, and dark, as the queen calls upon hundreds of her children to overwhelm the warrior. This is the trial of the fourth sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of high sensory overload and constant motion. The destined one must use the spin of the staff to create a barrier of wind, pushing back the tide of many-legged horrors. The sound of the clicking mandibles and the screeching of the queen is a drowning and terrible noise, making the cave feel like it is closing in on the intruder. When the queen is finally forced to retreat, the atmosphere shifts to a heavy and fragile silence, a realization that the true master of the ridge is still waiting in the light above. Leaving the caves behind, the journey leads to the Temple of the Yellow Flowers, a place of golden tiles and beautiful blossoms that sits atop the ridge. The atmosphere is bright and deceptive, a realization that the most beautiful places often hide the sharpest stings. This part of the history is a story of the Taoist master, where the atmosphere is one of religious order and hidden poison. You see the monks in their yellow robes, their faces calm, but their eyes filled with a cold and calculating light. The air is fragrant with the scent of incense and jasmine, but beneath it lies the sharp scent of sulfur. The destined one must walk through the garden paths, his movements precise and wary, knowing that every flower is a potential trap. The walk through the temple grounds is a story of the 100 eyes. You encounter the 100-eyed Taoist master, a being of immense spiritual power who has used the sisters of the spider to further his own path to immortality. This is a moment of cosmic horror and blinding light. The atmosphere is golden and sickly as the master opens the eyes hidden beneath his robes, emitting a light that turns the world into a blur of pain and disorientation. You feel the burn of the vision and the heaviness in the limbs as the poison of the light enters your soul. This part of the history is a realization that the pursuit of the divine can often lead to the most monstrous of transformations. The sound of the Taoists chanting is a deep and vibrating drone, signaling that you are fighting a god of the mud. Deep in the temple's inner sanctum, the final battle takes place under a sky that has turned a bruised and angry purple. The atmosphere is electric and final, a realization that the third relic is within reach. This is a story of the needle and the eye, where the warrior must use the magic of the heavens to pierce the darkness of the master's soul. The fight is a moment of staggering scale as the Taoist transforms into a giant centipede that shakes the very foundations of the ridge. The sound of the earth cracking is a deep and terrifying roar, making the warrior feel small but unyielding against the weight of the ancient corruption. The experience in the webbed hollow ends with the destined one standing at the cliff's edge, looking out over the misty valleys below. The silk of the cave has led to a sovereignty of the sun. He carries the weight of a fourth relic and the memory of the sisters. The atmosphere is one of quiet and exhausted resolve, a realization that the secrets of the great sage are becoming more painful to uncover. The focus would now shift to the fiery gorges of the west, as the history prepared to enter the flaming mountains and face the wrath of the Bull King's family. The final legacy of the Pansilk Ridge is a story of the clarity in the dark. You have seen the warrior survive the traps of the sisterhood and the poison of the false master. You have felt the stickiness of the thread and the heat of the golden light. As the green mist of the ridge fades behind you and the first red glow of the volcano appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the tear in the web, leaving behind the shadows for a world of fire, iron, and the final trials of the king. The journey moves away from the damp shadows of the Silk Ridge and into a world where the air itself seems to be made of liquid fire. This is the region of the Flaming Mountains, a jagged wasteland of red rock and black basalt, where the earth has been burning for centuries. This experience is defined by the bake of the eternal ember, where the atmosphere is one of oppressive heat and shimmering haze. This part of the history is a story of the scorch marks of the heavens, a realization that the anger of the gods can leave a scar on the world that never heals. The air here is dry and carries the sharp, metallic scent of heated iron and the sulfurous sting of volcanic vents. The sound of the wind through the narrow canyons is a heavy and low growl, making the mountain feel like a giant, sleeping beast that is constantly exhaling fire. As the warrior enters the lower passes, the atmosphere shifts to one of industrial war. He reaches the ash-gray pass, where the ground is covered in a layer of fine gray soot that poofs up with every step. This is the era of the Bull King's grief, where the atmosphere is one of heavy iron and smoldering rage. You see the remains of massive siege engines and the broken armor of the Bull King's soldiers, a reminder of the long struggle between the mountain and the heavens. This part of the history is a story of the divided family, a realization that power often tears apart those who should be closest. The sound of the lava bubbling in the deep pits is a thick and constant gurgle, a sign that the mountain's blood is boiling. The destined one moves with a sturdy and grounded pace, his staff absorbing the heat as the red glow of the magma reflects in his eyes. Deep within the cooling tunnels of the Bishui cave, the atmosphere becomes damp and steam-filled. The walls are slick with condensation, and the air is thick with the taste of boiling water. This is the trial of the hidden flame, where the atmosphere becomes one of heavy moisture and blurred vision. The destined one must navigate the slippery ledges while avoiding the bursts of scalding steam that hiss from the cracks in the stone. The sound of the water meeting the hot rock is a sharp and constant hiss, a sign that the elements are in a state of permanent war. This part of the history is a realization that even in the heart of the fire, there is no true refuge from the heat of the past. He feels the slickness of the algae under his boots and the heaviness of the steam in his lungs, a feeling of drowning in heat. At the summit of the peak, the group encounters the Red Boy, the son of the Bull King and the Rakshasi. The fight is a story of the spark and the sage. The atmosphere is violent, bright, and blinding as the boy calls upon the samadhi fire that cannot be extinguished by water. This is the trial of the fifth sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of high intensity and blazing speed. The destined one must use the wind of the staff to push back the waves of flame. His movements, a blur of fur and iron against the red sky. The sound of the fire roaring is a drowning and all-consuming note, making the summit feel like a crucible of the soul. When the boy finally falls, he transforms into a massive, multi-headed beast of smoke and flame, a realization that the inheritance of the bull is a heavy and monstrous burden. Leaving the peak behind, the journey leads to the Rakshasi's palace, a place of iron walls and cold stone that sits in the shadow of the main volcano. The atmosphere is majestic and mournful, a realization that even the most powerful queens can be broken by the loss of their kin. This part of the history is a story of the Iron Fan, where the atmosphere is one of whirling gales and final goodbyes. You see the Rakshasi standing on the balcony, her face hidden behind a mask of indifference, holding the fan that can cool the entire mountain or level a forest. The destined one must approach with a respectful and steady heart, his movements slow and deliberate, to show that he does not seek more blood. The sound of the fan snapping open is a sharp and final crack, a sign that the wind is about to change. The walk through the palace interior is a story of the Bull King's silence. You encounter the Bull King himself, a massive figure of muscle and iron who has grown weary of the games of the gods. This is a moment of aged strength and quiet despair. The atmosphere is stale and heavy as the king sits on his throne of black rock, his eyes filled with the weight of 1,000 years. You feel the heat of the forge and the coldness of the steel as you stand before him. This part of the history is a realization that the great sage's old brothers have all paid a price for their association with the heavens. The sound of the king's breathing is a deep and vibrating drone, signaling that you are standing in the presence of a dying legend. Deep in the heart of the volcano, the final battle for the fifth relic takes place over a sea of molten gold. The atmosphere is electric and final, a realization that the end of the journey is drawing near. This is a story of the horn and the staff, where the warrior must prove he is worthy of the legacy of the sages. The fight is a moment of earth-shaking power as the Bull King unleashes his full primal form, his footsteps cracking the very crust of the world. The sound of the mountain collapsing is a deep and terrifying roar, making the warrior feel small but unbreakable against the weight of the ancient earth. The experience in the flaming mountains ends with the destined one standing on the cooling basalt, looking out over the smoking valleys. The fire of the peak has led to a sovereignty of the ash. He carries the weight of a fifth relic and the heat of the bull's rage. The atmosphere is one of quiet and scorched resolve, a realization that the fragments of the great sage are almost complete. The focus would now shift to the birthplace of the myth, as the history prepared to return to Hugyo Mountain and face the final trials of the heavens. The final legacy of the Flaming Mountains is a story of the tempering of the soul. You have seen the warrior survive the Samadhi fire and the wrath of the broken family. You have felt the sting of the heat and the weight of the iron. As the red glow of the volcano fades behind you and the first cool mist of the home mountain appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the cooling of the stone, leaving behind the fire for a world of clouds, memories, and the final walk toward the great sage. The journey returns to its origin, high above the world, where the peaks of Hugyo Mountain pierce the layer of the eternal clouds. This is the birthplace of the myth, a land of floating islands, emerald forests, and waterfalls that seem to pour directly from the heavens. This experience is defined by the return of the king, where the atmosphere is one of majestic silence and finality. This part of the history is a story of the sacred reclaiming, a realization that every step taken across the deserts, snows, and fires of the world was leading back to this single point of stone. The air here is pure and thin, smelling of mountain orchids and the electricity of a gathering storm. The sound of the wind through the ancient pines is a high and harmonious song, making the mountain feel like a living monument to the great sage who once defied the gods. As the warrior ascends the familiar trails, the atmosphere shifts to one of celestial interference. He reaches the cloud-struck ridges, where the soldiers of the heavenly court have descended in their thousands to prevent the rebirth of the sage. This is the era of the iron cloud, where the atmosphere is one of high stakes and blinding light. You see the golden armor of the heavenly generals reflecting the sun, a reminder that the heavens do not forget and they do not forgive. This part of the history is a story of the siege of the soul, a realization that the final obstacle is the very order of the universe itself. The sound of the war drums beating in the sky is a deep and vibrating thrum, a sign that the heavens are watching. The destined one moves with a fluid and unstoppable momentum, his staff spinning with a steady and whistling whir. As he carves a path through the golden ranks, deep within the water curtain cave, the atmosphere becomes holy and echoing. The walls are covered in ancient moss, and the air is thick with the taste of cold mineral water. This is the trial of the hidden memory, where the atmosphere becomes one of deep reflection and spiritual weight. The destined one must walk past the empty stone throne where Wukong once sat, feeling the ache of the empty seat in his blood. The sound of the waterfall is a powerful and constant roar, a sign that the mountain is still mourning its lost master. This part of the history is a realization that to become the sage, one must carry the loneliness of the peak. He feels the dampness of the mist on his fur and the weight of the history in his hands, a feeling of total and sacred burden. At the highest plateau, the group encounters the remaining great sages, the old brothers of Wukong, who have been transformed into guardians of the final relic. The fight is a story of the mirror and the shadow. The atmosphere is vast, airy, and blinding. As the warrior battles through the clouds, his movements mirrored by the spirits of the past. This is the trial of the sixth sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of transcendent speed and infinite focus. The destined one must prove he is more than just a copy. He must prove he is the true heir to the spirit of the monkey. The sound of the staff hitting the heavenly shields is a sharp and ringing echo, making the plateau feel like a bell of the gods. When the guardians are finally overcome, the atmosphere shifts to a sudden and heavy peace, a realization that the fragments are finally whole. Leaving the plateau behind, the journey leads to the peak of the final breath, a lonely rock that sits above the cloud line, looking out over the entire world. The atmosphere is vast and infinite, a realization that the world below is small compared to the destiny of the stars. This part of the history is a story of the stone egg, where the atmosphere is one of expectant silence and ancient magic. You see the remains of the stone from which the great sage was first born, glowing with a soft and pulsing light. The destined one must approach with a heart of iron and mind of water, his movements slow and reverent as he prepares to merge his spirit with the relic. The sound of the mountain's heart beating is a low and constant throb, a sign that the earth is ready to give up its secret. The walk through the final gate is a story of the sage's choice. You encounter the spirit of the original Wukong, a shadow of the man who dared to challenge the Jade Emperor. This is a moment of self-reflection and cosmic truth. The atmosphere is golden and hazy as the two monkey warriors face each other in a world between life and death. You feel the heat of the ambition and the coldness of the fate as you stand before your own legacy. This part of the history is a realization that immortality is a cage, and the only true freedom is the freedom to fade. The sound of the spirit's laughter is a soft and jagged note, signaling that you are fighting the idea of greatness itself. Deep in the heart of the heavens, the final battle for the soul of the sage takes place on the edge of the sun. The atmosphere is electric and eternal, a realization that the journey is no longer about a monkey, but about the spirit of rebellion. This is a story of the staff and the sky, where the warrior must break the chains of the golden hoop once and for all. The fight is a moment of infinite power as the destined one unleashes the full potential of the 6 relics, his form growing to the size of a mountain as he strikes at the firmament. The sound of the heavens cracking is a deep and terrifying roar, making the warrior feel infinite and unfettered against the weight of the divine law. The experience on Hugyo Mountain ends with the destined one sitting on the edge of the cliff, looking at the sun rising over a world that is finally quiet. The cloud of the peak has led to a sovereignty of the soul. He carries the weight of the 6 relics and the freedom of the great sage. The atmosphere is one of quiet and absolute resolve, a realization that the myth is no longer a story in a book, but a living breath in the wind. The focus would now shift to the endless journey as the history prepared to follow the sage into the unknown reaches of the heavens. The final legacy of Hugyo Mountain is a story of the completion of the circle. You have seen the warrior return to the stone and find the man within the myth. You have felt the sting of the clouds and the weight of the crown. As the golden light of the dawn fills the valley and the first birds of the new era begin to sing, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the silence of the peak, leaving behind the mountain for a world of stars, spirit, and the journey that never ends. The journey turns away from the main path to follow the echoes of the deep, leading the destined one to the hidden corners of the world where the ancient loom dragons reside. These are not the soaring spirits of the heavens, but the forgotten guardians of the waters and the winds, bound to the earth by golden chains and heavy memories. This experience is defined by the call of the hidden scales, where the atmosphere is one of submerged power and ancient regret. This part of the history is a story of the loon's exile, a realization that even the children of the sea can be imprisoned by the changing tides of the divine. The air in these secret places is heavy with the scent of ozone, wet stone, and the metallic tang of old lightning. The sound of the world is a low and vibrating thrum, as if the earth itself is humming a song that has been forgotten by the people of the sun. The search for the first dragon leads back to the Black Wind Mountain, hidden behind the curtain of the waterfall. Here, the red loon slumbers in a cave of red earth and jagged crystals. The atmosphere is damp, warm, and electric, a realization that the heat of the dragon's blood has never truly cooled. You see the massive beast coiled around the stone pillars, its scales glowing with a faint and burning ember. This is the era of the Bound Brother, where the atmosphere is one of restrained fury and sudden motion. The fight is a story of thunder and staff, as the dragon awakens with a roar that shakes the very roots of the mountain. The sound of the dragon's tail striking the cave floor is a sharp and deafening crack, making the cavern feel like a chamber of storms. The destined one must move with a fluid and grounded center, dodging the streaks of red lightning that dance across the wet floor. The journey then moves to the Yellow Wind Ridge, where the Cyan Loon stands like a statue on a lonely plateau overlooking the desert. The atmosphere is dry, sharp, and static, a realization that the dragon has become one with the scorching winds of the west. This is a story of the stone dragon, where the atmosphere is one of frozen agony and piercing light. You see the dragon's blue scales covered in a layer of fine golden dust, its eyes fixed on a horizon it can no longer reach. The fight is a moment of cold precision as the beast moves with a stiff and powerful might, its blade cutting through the air with a high and whistling note. The air is thick with the taste of sand and electricity, making the ridge feel like an altar of the gale. When the dragon is finally defeated, it leaves behind a single and polished pearl, a sign that the spirit has been set free from the stone. In the frozen New West, the Destined One finds the Kangjin Loong, a creature of silver scales and blinding snow that inhabits the peaks above the Bitter Lake. The atmosphere is vast, airy, and chilly, a realization that some dragons have chosen the heights of the sky as their prison. This part of the history is a story of the dragon of the stars, where the atmosphere is one of celestial grace and frantic velocity. The fight takes place in a world of white as the dragon flies through the clouds, its body a long and shimmering ribbon of light. The sound of the dragon's cry is a high and haunting melody, echoing off the ice walls like a lament for the heavens. The Destined One must use the magic of the wind to stay his ground, his staff striking the silver scales with a ringing and hollow thud. The final of the four brothers, the Black Loong, is hidden within a wall of sand in the depths of the Rockrest Valley. The atmosphere is muffled and heavy, a realization that the weight of the earth is the most permanent of cages. This is a story of the buried pulse, where the atmosphere becomes one of rhythmic impact and dust. The dragon uses two massive maces to strike the ground, creating shockwaves that ripple through the sand like waves of stone. The sound of the impact is a deep and terrifying boom, making the valley feel like a heartbeat of the mountain. This part of the history is a realization that to defeat the dragon, one must find the stillness in the center of the storm. He feels the vibration in the feet and the grit in the teeth, a feeling of total and earthbound struggle. With the four pearls of the Loong brothers in hand, the journey leads to the Great Pagoda in the New West, a structure that sits at the intersection of the realms. The atmosphere is holy, ancient, and expectant, a realization that the secret path is finally opening. This is a story of the mural of the ages, where the walls are covered in paintings that depict the entire history of the great sage. The air is still and smells of old ink and divine incense. The Destined One walks through the halls, his movements slow and reverent as the murals begin to glow with a soft and golden light. The sound of the pagoda's bells is a deep and harmonious note, signaling that the secret chapter of the myth is about to be revealed. Deep in the heart of the pagoda, the group encounters the Great Master, a being who has watched over the history of the monkey for thousands of years. This is a moment of spiritual revelation and hidden truth. The atmosphere is golden and hazy as the Master explains that the journey was never just about the relics, but about the testing of the will. This part of the history is a realization that the Destined One is not just a successor, but a new beginning for the world. The sound of the Master's staff hitting the floor is a single and final note, making the room feel like a cradle of the future. They They see the path leading to the Mount May, a secret realm where the greatest of the sage's rivals still waits for a final duel. The experience of the Loong dragons and the great pagoda ends with the destined one standing at the gateway of the heavens. The scales of the deep have led to a sovereignty of the stars. He carries the weight of 4 dragon pearls and the knowledge of the murals. The atmosphere is one of ready and sacred resolve, a realization that the true end of the journey is hidden within a dream of the past. The focus would now shift to the secret realm of Mount May, as the history prepared to face the Erlang Shen and decide the final fate of the great sage's soul. The final legacy of the Loong brothers is a story of the freedom found in the duel. You have seen the warrior free the dragons from their chains and find the path to the hidden pagoda. You have felt the sting of the lightning and the weight of the sand. As the golden light of the pagoda fades behind you and the first mist of the secret mountain appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the shine of the pearl, leaving behind the waters for a world of clouds, gods, and the final walk toward the truth. The journey ascends beyond the boundaries of the known maps into the hidden dimension of Mount May, a sanctuary of jagged peaks and swirling celestial mists that exist between the mortal world and the high heavens. This is a place of absolute purity and terrifying stillness, where the very air feels sharpened by the presence of a god. This experience is defined by the clash of the immortals, where the atmosphere is one of supreme tension and divine light. This part of the history is a story of the rivalry of the ages, a realization that the great sage's story cannot truly end until his greatest adversary, Erlang Shen, is faced once more. The air here carries the scent of cold ozone and ancient, frozen plum blossoms. The sound of the wind through the celestial pines is a high and piercing whistle, making the mountain feel like a blade pointing at the sun. As the destined one reaches the summit, the atmosphere shifts from eerie quiet to overwhelming majesty. Standing on a platform of white jade is Erlang Shen, the three-eyed god of the heavens, his silver armor reflecting the light of 1,000 stars. This is the era of the final judgment, where the atmosphere is one of cold calculation and peerless skill. You see the god's steady gaze, a reminder that he is the one who once captured Wukong and brought him to the chopping block of the Jade Emperor. This part of the history is a story of the two warriors, a realization that they are two sides of the same coin, one representing the order of the heavens, the other the chaos of the earth. The sound of Erlang's spear spinning is a sharp and deadly whir, a sign that the time for words has passed. The destined one moves with a focused and heavy intent, his staff glowing with the stored power of the 5 relics. The duel begins as a symphony of motion and magic. The atmosphere is blinding, rapid, and electric. As the two warriors warp through the air, their weapons clashing with a high and ringing impact that shatters the nearby stone pillars. This is the trial of the third eye, where the atmosphere becomes one of total sensory precision. Erlang Shen uses his divine eye to see through every illusion and every transformation, forcing the destined one to rely on pure, raw skill. The sound of the magic colliding is a constant and deafening roar, making the mountaintop feel like a forge of the gods. You feel the vibration of the impact in your bones and the bite of the divine spark on your skin. This part of the history is a realization that to defeat a god, one must first exhaust the heavens. In the middle of the combat, the atmosphere shifts to a scale of giants. Erlang Shen calls upon his law-enforcing form, growing into a massive, multi-armed deity that towers over the clouds. The four heavenly kings appear as colossal shadows in the mist, their voices a deep and vibrating thunder that shakes the foundations of the world. This is a story of the war in the heavens, where the atmosphere becomes one of awe and cosmic dread. The destined one must transform into a great stone ape, his size matching the gods as he leaps from peak to peak. The sound of the mountains crumbling under their weight is a deep and terrifying boom, making the world feel like it is returning to chaos. This part of the history is a realization that the spirit of the monkey is infinite and unfettered, capable of matching even the greatest powers of the celestial court. The battle reaches its peak in a world of pure white light. The atmosphere is silent and blinding as the two warriors trade blows that rewrite the history of the mountain. This is a moment of spiritual recognition, where Erlang Shen begins to see the true heart of the seeker. This part of the history is a story of the passing of the torch, a realization that the god has been waiting for someone strong enough to inherit the burden of the sage's memories. The sound of the final strike is a single and harmonious note, clearing the mist and revealing a sky filled with golden and eternal stars. When the god finally lowers his spear, the atmosphere shifts to a profound and heavy peace, a realization that the final secret has been shared. Erlang Shen reveals the truth of Wukong's final transformation, explaining that the sage did not die, but chose to scatter his spirit so that it could never be used as a weapon by the heavens. This is a story of the secret relic, where the atmosphere becomes one of sacred knowledge and melancholy grace. The destined one receives the memory of the sage, a realization that the true sixth relic is the will to be free. The air on Mount May becomes soft and fragrant, smelling of the peach gardens of the heavens. The sound of the god's voice is a low and resonant bell, signaling that the chain of the past has finally been broken. The warrior feels the light of the memory entering his soul, a feeling of total and divine completion. The experience on Mount May ends with the destined one standing alone on the jade platform, looking down at the world of men far below. The clouds of the peak have led to a sovereignty of the mind. He carries the weight of the seventh secret and the respect of a god. The atmosphere is one of quiet and absolute readiness, a realization that the final climb back to Hugyo Mountain is no longer a search for power, but a return to the self. The focus would now shift to the true ending. As the history prepared to see the sage reborn in the heart of the original stone, the final legacy of Mount May is a story of the victory over the divine. You have seen the warrior match the heavens and find the truth hidden behind the silver mask. You have felt the sting of the lightning and the weight of the giant's step. As the golden light of the secret realm fades and the familiar scent of the home mountain returns, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the closing of the third eye, leaving behind the gods for a world of spirit, freedom, and the journey that has finally come home. The journey shifts its focus from the present seeker to the echoes of the Great Rebellion, descending into the memories of the old woods and the broken cliffs where the first fires of defiance were lit. This is a story told through the eyes of the lesser demons, the mountain spirits, the small monkey scouts, and the fox demons who watched the sky turn gold with the arrival of the heavenly host. This experience is defined by the shadow of the golden hoop, where the atmosphere is one of nostalgic terror and wild freedom. This part of the history is a story of the day the heavens fell, a realization that for the small creatures of the earth, the great sage was not just a king, but a sun that refused to set. The air here smells of ancient ozone, crushed pine needles, and the iron scent of celestial blood. The sound of the world is a high and muffled ringing, like the aftermath of a great bell being struck, making the forest feel like a living library of war. The walk through the graveyard of the sky soldiers is a story of celestial debris and earthly moss. You see the remains of golden spears and white jade breastplates being slowly swallowed by the roots of the hugyo trees. This is the era of the first havoc, where the atmosphere is one of impossible victory and heavy price. You encounter the spirit of an old crow diviner who remembers when Wukong first tore his name from the book of life and death. This part of the history is a story of the ink of the underworld, a realization that when the sage defied death, he also invited a different kind of darkness into the mountain. The sound of the diviner's wooden staff hitting the stone is a sharp and dry talk, echoing through the hollows of the mountain like a clock that has lost its hands. The air is thick with the taste of old magic, making the valley feel like a memory that refuses to fade. Deep within the valley of the broken banners, the atmosphere becomes static and unstable. You see the spectral forms of the monkey soldiers who fought during the siege of the Peach Banquet. This is the trial of the loyal shadow, where the atmosphere becomes one of fierce pride and lingering grief. The Destined One moves through these memories as if walking through a sea of thick honey, the images of the past flickering like a broken lantern. He sees the original Wukong standing on the peak, his red cape a lash of fire against the blue sky, laughing as he swallows the pills of immortality. The sound of the celestial war horns is a low and drowning groan, a realization that for every moment of glory, the mountain paid with 1,000 years of fear. You feel the vibration of the earth as the giants of the heavens step onto the mortal plane, a feeling of total and fragile defiance. The group encounters the remnant of the vanguard, a massive bull demon who was left behind when the great sage was finally captured under the mountain of the 5 elements. The fight is a story of the forgotten century. The atmosphere is gray, dusty, and heavy as the demon attacks with a weapon made from a shattered pillar of the sky. This is the trial of the left behind, where the atmosphere becomes one of stubborn rage and ancient loyalty. The demon does not fight to win, but to protect the empty cave of his master. The sound of the iron hitting the rock is a deep and terrifying boom, making the ridge feel like a drum of the damned. When the sentry is finally defeated, the atmosphere shifts to a soft and mournful peace, a realization that the grief of the servant is the heaviest burden of all. Leaving the memories behind, the journey leads to the cave of the 3 refuges, where the first scriptures of the rebellion were carved into the stone. The atmosphere is quiet and intellectual, a realization that the great sage was not just a warrior, but a scholar of the self. This part of the history is a story of the words that woke the world, where the atmosphere is one of ink and illumination. You see the carvings that explain the 8-fold path of the ape, a realization that true power comes from the stillness of the mind amidst the chaos of the blow. The air is cool and smells of old stone and damp earth. The sound of the water dripping into the meditation pools is a single and holy note, signaling that the philosophy of the myth is just as sharp as the staff. The walk through the inner sanctum of the sage is a story of the personal cost of godhood. You find the remains of the great sage's personal belongings, a broken mirror, a tattered robe, and a small wooden bird carved for a child. This is a moment of raw and small humanity. The atmosphere is intimate and quiet as you realize that the man who fought the heavens was once just a small monkey looking for a home. This part of the history is a realization that the greatness of the myth often hides the simplicity of the heart. The sound of the wind through the cave entrance is a low and hollow whistle, making the warrior feel connected and grounded to the human side of the legend. Deep in the heart of the mountain's roots, the final memory of the havoc takes place in a cavern of reflection. The atmosphere is silver and shifting as the destined one sees the moment Wukong realized the golden hoop was not just a crown, but a prison for the mind. This is a story of the realization of the cage, where the warrior must learn to accept the boundless without the need for a title. The fight is a moment of mental combat, as the images of the past try to pull the destined one into the cycles of revenge. The sound of the chains rattling in the dark is a sharp and jagged note, signaling that the true rebellion is not against the gods, but against the idea of being a god. The experience of the Havoc lore ends with the destined one standing at the edge of the waterfall curtain, looking out at the mountain as it was in the days of the sun. The the ashes of the past have led to a sovereignty of the memory. He carries the weight of 1,000 broken spears and the laughter of the dead sage. The atmosphere is one of ready and somber focus, a realization that the history of the world is a scroll that is constantly being rewritten. The focus would now shift to the wastes of the Forbidden Lands, as the history prepared to follow the first disciple into the realm of the White Bone. The final legacy of the havoc in heaven is a story of the beauty in the defeat. You have seen the small demons stand against the gold and the sage laugh at the face of the end. You have felt the sting of the ozone and the weight of the old iron. As the golden vision of the past fades and the gray stone of the present returns, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the silence of the grave, leaving behind the war for a world of spirit, truth, and the journey that continues to breathe. The journey moves away from the vibrant peaks of the mountain and into the silent, bleached landscape of the Forbidden Wastes. This is a land where the earth has been stripped of its color, a vast expanse of white sand and calcified rock that looks like the skeleton of a world. This experience is defined by the ache of the empty bone, where the atmosphere is one of fragile stillness and whispered regrets. This part of the history is a story of the Lady of the White Bone, a realization that the most terrifying enemies are often those born from a heart that was once too full of love. The air here is dry and tastes of chalk and ancient dust, carrying no scent of life or growth. The sound of the world is a thin and brittle whistling as the wind passes through the holes in the porous rocks, making the wastes feel like a colossal, hollow flute, playing a song for the forgotten dead. As the Destined One walks across the white dunes, the atmosphere shifts to one of optical illusions and shifting truths. This is the era of the first disciple's shadow, where the atmosphere is one of deep guilt and residual magic. You see the spectral outlines of a journey that happened long ago, a realization that the path of the original pilgrims was stained by the blood of the innocent and the misunderstood. This part of the history is a story of the 3 strikes, where the great sage was forced to kill a demon that looked like a human, leading to his exile and the breaking of his master's heart. The sound of the sand shifting underfoot is a steady and hissing slide, a sign that the ground itself is trying to bury the secrets of the past. The Destined One moves with a light and wary step, his staff clearing the dust as the pale light of the moon reflects off the white ground. Deep within the cave of the marrow, the atmosphere becomes cold and intimate. The walls are made of polished white stone that looks like ivory, and the ceiling is draped with long, bone-like stalactites. This is the trial of the unsentimental, where the atmosphere becomes one of stark reality and stripped emotion. The Destined One must walk through the remains of the White Bone Demon's court, a realization that she sought to build a kingdom that would never rot or fade. The sound of his own breathing is a loud and isolated rhythm in the silence, making the cave feel like the inside of a ribcage. This part of the history is a realization that immortality can be a frozen prison where nothing ever changes and nothing ever grows. He feels the smoothness of the bone under his hand and the chill of the void in his chest, a feeling of total and hollow solitude. At the center of the wastes, the group encounters the remnant of the white bone, a towering construct of skeletal hands and ghostly fire. The fight is a story of the spirit and the shell. The atmosphere is eerie, cold, and sharp as the construct falls apart and reforms with every strike, its movements a jerk and fluid dance of the dead. This is the trial of the seventh sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of perception beyond the flesh. The destined one must strike at the core of the grief rather than the armor of the bone. The sound of the bones clattering together is a sharp and jagged note, making the wastes feel like a chamber of shattered glass. When the spirit is finally laid to rest, the atmosphere shifts to a soft and dust-filled peace, a realization that even the most vengeful ghost just wants to be forgotten. Leaving the cave behind, the journey leads to the Temple of the Broken Lotus, a ruin that sits on the edge of a great salt lake. The atmosphere is salty and desolate, a realization that the wisdom of the past can become a bitter poison if it is not tempered with mercy. This part of the history is a story of the monk's doubt, where the atmosphere is one of faded gold and salt-crusted silk. You see the statues of the original pilgrims, their faces worn away by the wind, a realization that even the holiest of journeys leaves behind a trail of broken dreams. The air is heavy with the taste of salt and old paper. The sound of the waves hitting the salt crust is a muffled and heavy thud, signaling that the sea of history is drying up. The walk through the temple courtyard is a story of the first disciples' fall. You encounter the shadow of the great sage as he was during his exile angry, lonely, and misunderstood. This is a moment of raw and primal reflection. The atmosphere is gray and stormy as the shadow attacks with a wild and reckless fury, a realization that Wukong's greatest struggle was always with his own nature. You feel the weight of the betrayal and the heat of the injustice as you parry the blows of the ghost. This part of the history is a realization that to be the destined one, you must accept the darkness of the legend as well as its light. The sound of the staff clashing against the shadow is a hollow and echoing note, making the warrior feel connected and weighted to the sorrow of his predecessor. Deep in the heart of the salt lake, the final trial of the wastes takes place in a cavern of mirrors. The atmosphere is blinding and reflective, a realization that the white bone is a mirror for the soul. This is a story of the transparency of the spirit, where the warrior must look at his own reflection and see the monkey within the god. The fight is a moment of psychological weight, as the mirrors show the destined one every life he has taken and every mistake he has made. The sound of the glass shattering is a sharp and high scream, signaling that the true clarity is found in the breaking of the ego. The experience in the Forbidden Wastes ends with the Destined One standing on a bridge of salt, looking out at the horizon where the white sand meets the black sky. The dust of the bone has led to a sovereignty of the void. He carries the weight of the lady's grief and the disciples' exile. The atmosphere is one of quiet and transparent resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of stripping away until only the truth remains. The focus would now shift to the sunken kingdom of the East, as the history prepared to dive into the underwater cities and face the ghosts of the Dragon Kings. The final legacy of the Forbidden Wastes is a story of the beauty in the bareness. You have seen the warrior walk through the graveyard of the world and find the mercy within the bone. You have felt the sting of the salt and the weight of the silence. As the white dunes fade behind you and the first scent of the deep sea appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the whiteness of the path, leaving behind the ghosts for a world of water, scales, and the journey that continues to dive. The journey dives beneath the surface of the eastern sea, where the sunlight fades into a deep and heavy blue. This is the sunken kingdom of the East, a realm of drowned palaces and coral-encrusted towers that once served as the magnificent courts of the Dragon Kings. This experience is defined by the pressure of the deep, where the atmosphere is one of muffled majesty and submerged silence. This part of the history is a story of the corrupted current, a realization that when the great sage first took the golden cudgel from these halls, he left behind a void that the darkness was all too eager to fill. The air here is non-existent, replaced by a thick, cold water that tastes of salt and ancient iron. The sound of the world is a low and constant thrum, as the currents move through the ribcages of sunken ships, making the kingdom feel like a giant, drowning lung that has been holding its breath for centuries. As the Destined One swims through the ruins of the main boulevard, the atmosphere shifts to one of ghostly grandeur. This is the era of the abandoned throne, where the atmosphere is one of deep neglect and flickering bioluminescence. You see the remains of the pearl-inlaid walls and the gardens of swaying kelp, now guarded by the skeletal remains of the shrimp soldiers and crab generals. This part of the history is a story of the debt of the sea, a realization that the prosperity of the heavens often comes at the expense of the world below. The sound of the water rushing past the stone pillars is a steady and bubbling hiss, a sign that the sea is trying to reclaim the memories of its kings. The Destined One moves with a slow and weightless grace, his staff trailing a faint and blue light that cuts through the murky shadows of the abyss. Deep within the crystal trench, the atmosphere becomes dark and crushing. The walls are made of translucent mineral that glows with a sickly, internal fire, and the floor is littered with the rusted anchors of 1,000 years. This is the trial of the bottomless, where the atmosphere becomes one of primal fear and sensory deprivation. The destined one must navigate the narrow vents while avoiding the giant, blind eels that strike from the mud. The sound of his own heart beating is a loud and thudding echo in the water, making the trench feel like the inside of a leviathan. This part of the history is a realization that at the bottom of the world, strength is measured by endurance rather than speed. He feels the icy pinch of the current on his skin and the heaviness of the salt in his spirit, a feeling of total and drowning focus. At the heart of the Dragon Palace, the group encounters the shadow of Ao Kuang, the great dragon king of the East. The fight is a story of the tide and the staff. The atmosphere is violent, distorted, and cold as the dragon moves through the water like a shimmering ribbon of malice, creating whirlpools that tear at the stone foundations. This is the trial of the eighth sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of fluidity and constant flux. The destined one must use the weight of the staff to ground himself against the surging waves, his movements a dance of steel and foam against the black water. The sound of the dragon's roar underwater is a deep and vibrating groan, making the palace feel like it is collapsing under the weight of the ocean. When the shadow is finally dissipated, the atmosphere shifts to a muffled and bubbling peace, a realization that the sea has finally forgiven the theft of its pillar. Leaving the palace behind, the journey leads to the forest of the red coral, a place where the trees are made of living stone and the leaves are the fingers of the anemone. The atmosphere is vibrant and lethal, a realization that the most beautiful colors of the deep are often the most poisonous. This part of the history is a story of the siren's call, where the atmosphere is one of eerie song and drifting silk. You see the spectral forms of the palace dancers, their movements slow and hypnotic as they try to pull the warrior into the deep mud. The water is thick with the taste of bitter ink and sweet nectar. The sound of the distant whale song is a high and haunting note, signaling that the depths of the heart are harder to navigate than the depths of the sea. The walk through the coral gates is a story of the dragon's remorse. You encounter the spirit of the third prince, who was once slain by Neja, and whose soul has been wandering the reefs ever since. This is a moment of tragic and noble reflection. The atmosphere is blue and shimmering as the prince shares the story of how his family was broken by the pride of the gods. You feel the coldness of the rejection and the weight of the injustice as you listen to the echoes of the past. This part of the history is a realization that the glory of the heavens is built on a foundation of fallen princes. The sound of the prince's voice is a soft and bubbling whisper, making the warrior feel sorrowful and connected to the victims of the divine order. Deep in the heart of the Pearl Vault, the final battle of the Sunken Kingdom takes place in a chamber of infinite reflections. The atmosphere is bright and distorted, a realization that the sea is a mirror that shows the truth of the one who looks within. This is a story of the clarity of the water, where the warrior must find the still point within the storm of the current. The fight is a moment of staggering pressure as the water itself turns into a weapon, pressing in from all sides with the force of a mountain. The sound of the glass pearls shattering is a sharp and muffled snap, signaling that the true treasure is found in the release of the desire for power. The experience in the sunken kingdom ends with the destined one standing on a bridge of white shell, looking up at the surface where the light of the sun is a distant and flickering star. The tides of the east have led to a sovereignty of the current. He carries the weight of the dragon's debt and the silence of the abyss. The atmosphere is one of quiet and buoyant resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of sinking deep before one can rise high. The focus would now shift to the thunder-scarred plains of the north, as the history prepared to follow the trail of lightning and face the ghosts of the heavenly generals. The final legacy of the sunken kingdom of the East is a story of the beauty in the drowning. You have seen the warrior walk through the halls of the dragon and find the mercy within the deep. You have felt the sting of the salt and the weight of the pressure. As the blue water fades behind you and the first scent of the mountain air returns to your lungs, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the bubble that breaks at the surface, leaving behind the abyss for a world of thunder, sky, and the journey that continues to climb. The journey ascends from the crushing depths of the sea to the high, blasted plateaus of the thunder-scarred plains. This is a land where the sky is a permanent, bruised charcoal, and the horizon is jagged with the remains of celestial spears that fell during the great sage's first rebellion. This experience is defined by the vibration of the bolt, where the atmosphere is one of electric tension and ancient scars. This part of the history is a story of the battlefield of the stars, a realization that the war between the mountain and the heavens was not fought with men, but with the very forces of nature. The air here is sharp and thin, smelling of ozone, scorched grass, and the metallic tang of ionized stone. The sound of the world is a constant and low hum, as the static electricity from the clouds dances across the iron-rich rocks, making the plains feel like a giant, sleeping circuit, waiting for a single spark to wake the ghosts of the generals. As the destined one walks through the valley of the fallen banners, the atmosphere shifts to one of military mourning. He reaches the gate of the 9 heavens, a ruined archway where the white jade has been turned to black glass by the heat of the divine lightning. This is the era of the heavenly host's defeat, where the atmosphere is one of heavy iron and lingering malice. You see the spectral outlines of the thunder chariots and the broken shields of the star soldiers, a reminder that even the gods can bleed when faced with the fury of the monkey. This part of the history is a story of the weight of the mandate, a realization that the order of the heavens is maintained only through the threat of the storm. The sound of the distant thunder is a deep and rhythmic drum, a sign that the sky is still angry. the destined one moves with a stiff and powerful might, his staff attracting small arcs of blue light that hiss as they hit the ground. Deep within the ravine of the whispering bolts, the atmosphere becomes static and unstable. The air is so charged that the fur on the warrior's neck begins to stand on end, and the taste in his mouth is bitter and metallic. This is the trial of the lightning sentry, where the atmosphere becomes one of high alert and sudden violence. The destined one must navigate the fields of copper-colored grass while avoiding the pillars of white fire that strike from the clouds without warning. The sound of the lightning hitting the rock is a sharp and deafening crack, making the ravine feel like a forge of the sky. This part of the history is a realization that in the plains, movement is a prayer to the gods of the storm. He feels the tingle in the fingertips and the sharpness of the ozone in his lungs, a feeling of total and electric vulnerability. At the center of the plateau, the group encounters the remnant of the nine-headed lion, a celestial beast that once served as the mount for a great general. The fight is a story of the roar and the staff. The atmosphere is loud, blinding, and chaotic as the beast calls down a rain of golden bolts that turn the earth into a sea of sparks. This is the trial of the ninth sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of predictive reflex and lightning speed. The destined one must timing his warps to the rhythm of the flashes, striking the beast between the pulses of the storm. The sound of the lion's roar is a deep and bone-shaking thunder, making the plateau feel like it is tearing away from the earth. When the beast is finally brought low, the atmosphere shifts to a sudden and ringing silence, a realization that the guardian of the sky has been silenced. Leaving the plateau behind, the journey leads to the Temple of the Star Watchers, a ruin that sits on the highest peak of the plains, looking out over the curve of the world. The atmosphere is vast and airy, a realization that the heavens are not a place, but a cold and infinite perspective. This part of the history is a story of the fallen general, where the atmosphere is one of broken silver and fatting light. You see the spirit of a commander who was exiled for failing to capture the sage, his armor rusted by the rain and his sword chipped by the years. The air is cool and smells of old metal and high clouds. The sound of the wind through the temple's bronze bells is a thin and melancholy note, signaling that the glory of the war has turned into a lament for the dead. The walk through the temple altar is a story of the sage's hubris. You encounter a vision of Wukong as he sat among the stars, mocking the constellations and drinking the wine of the gods. This is a moment of grand and lonely reflection. The atmosphere is golden and hazy, as the vision shows the moment the sage realized that even the highest peak of the heavens is just another cage. You feel the heat of the pride and the coldness of the realization as you stand in the shadow of the past. This part of the history is a realization that the true havoc was not the breaking of the palaces, but the breaking of the faith. The sound of the vision's laughter is a soft and jagged echo, making the warrior feel small and fleeting against the scale of the cosmic tragedy. Deep in the heart of the Starwell, the final trial of the planes takes place in a chamber of infinite voids. The atmosphere is blinding and electric, a realization that the light of the stars is a fire that consumes the ego. This is a story of the clarity of the bolt, where the warrior must find the internal stillness that allows the lightning to pass through him without harm. The fight is a moment of spiritual impact, as the destined one must parry the very concept of the divine will. The sound of the stars colliding is a high and ringing scream, signaling that the true power is found in the ability to stand unmoved in the center of the storm. The experience in the thunder-scarred plains ends with the destined one standing at the edge of the cliff, looking at the clouds as they finally begin to part, revealing a sliver of a moon. The scars of the sky have led to a sovereignty of the storm. He carries the weight of the lion's roar and the silence of the generals. The atmosphere is one of quiet and charged resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of striking true before one can find the peace of the earth. The focus would now shift to the forgotten valley of the Medicine King. As the history prepared to explore the lore of the healing herbs and face the ghosts of the alchemists, the final legacy of the thunder-scarred plains is a story of the beauty in the scar. You have seen the warrior walk through the graveyard of the stars and find the mercy within the lightning. You have felt the sting of the ozone and the weight of the thunder. As the gray clouds fade behind you and the first scent of the herbal valley appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the spark that fades into the earth, leaving behind the sky for a world of leaves, medicine, and the journey that continues to heal. The journey moves away from the scorched plains of thunder and enters the lush, emerald depths of the forgotten valley of the Medicine King. This is a land hidden behind a veil of permanent, swirling mist where the trees grow tall and crooked, their bark covered in a thick layer of glowing purple moss. This experience is defined by the scent of the bitter root, where the atmosphere is one of ancient healing and chemical rot. This part of the history is a story of the pills of the heavens, a realization that the quest for immortality often leaves a trail of poisoned soil and broken spirits in its wake. The air here is heavy and sweet, smelling of crushed jasmine, damp earth, and the sharp, medicinal sting of fermented herbs. The sound of the world is a low and constant gurgle, as hidden springs of mineral-rich water bubble up from the roots of the mountains, making the valley feel like a giant, living laboratory that has been abandoned by its masters. As the destined one walks through the garden of the 10,000 leaves, the atmosphere shifts to one of faded knowledge. He reaches the ruined workshops of the celestial alchemists, where the stone furnaces are now cold and overgrown with vines that look like creeping veins. This is the era of the failed elixir, where the atmosphere is one of dusty parchment and lingering vapor. You see the broken ceramic jars and the rusted bronze scales once used to measure the weight of a soul. This part of the history is a story of the greed of the eternal, a realization that the gods sought to bottle the essence of life itself, only to create a world of stagnant spirits. The sound of the wind through the empty jars is a high and hollow whistling, a sign that the valley is still trying to breathe through its scars. The destined one moves with a soft and deliberate step, his staff brushing against the leaves as the soft glow of the moss lights his way through the green dark. Deep within the cavern of the fermenting mist, the atmosphere becomes thick and hallucinogenic. The air is so saturated with the pollen of the spirit flowers that the warrior's vision begins to double, and the shadows of the trees seem to dance with a slow and liquid life. This is the trial of the alchemist's breath, where the atmosphere becomes one of nausea and spiritual weight. The destined one must navigate the narrow bridges of twisted roots while avoiding the bursts of toxic gas that erupt from the fungal pods on the floor. The sound of his own pulse is a loud and thudding rhythm in his ears, making the cavern feel like the inside of a beating heart. This part of the history is a realization that in the valley, clarity is the only antidote to the illusions of the mind. He feels the slickness of the sap on his fur and the heaviness of the scent in his lungs, a feeling of total and drowning intoxication. At the center of the valley, the group encounters the remnant of the Medicine King's disciple, a being who has been transformed into a creature of wood and vine by his own experiments. The fight is a story of the root and the staff. The atmosphere is lethal, green, and silent as the disciple calls upon the earth to rise up and entwine the warrior in a cage of thorns. This is the trial of the 10th sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of patience and calculated growth. The destined one must use the heat of his spirit to burn through the tangling vines, his movements a blur of motion and ember against the dark emerald canopy. The sound of the wood snapping is a sharp and jagged crack, making the valley floor feel like it is breaking apart. When the disciple is finally laid to rest, his body dissolves into a pile of dry leaves, a realization that even the strongest medicine cannot cure the rot of the soul. Leaving the workshops behind, the journey leads to the Temple of the 1,000 Golden Pills, a structure that sits atop a waterfall of white milk. The atmosphere is majestic and sterile, a realization that the pursuit of perfection can lead to a cold and loveless world. This part of the history is a story of the sage's theft, where the atmosphere is one of faded splendor and divine theft. You see the murals depicting the moment Wukong broke into the alchemist's stores and swallowed the pills of Lao Tzu, a realization that the monkey's immortality was a chaos born of gluttony. The air is cool and carries the taste of metallic gold and cold water. The sound of the waterfall hitting the rocks below is a steady and drowning roar, signaling that the river of life cannot be bottled. The walk through the temple altar is a story of the price of living forever. You encounter a vision of the alchemists as they worked day and night to please the Jade Emperor, their faces growing thin and their eyes growing hollow. This is a moment of raw and intellectual tragedy. The atmosphere is gray and dusty, as the vision shows the moment they realized that the pills they made would never be for them. You feel the weight of the labor and the coldness of the rejection as you stand in the shadow of the past. This part of the history is a realization that the glory of the gods is built on the service of the forgotten. The sound of the vision's sighs is a soft and lingering note, making the warrior feel grounded and heavy with the sorrow of the workers. Deep in the heart of the medicine well, the final trial of the valley takes place in a chamber of pure essence. The atmosphere is bright and healing, a realization that true medicine is not a pill, but the balance of the nature. This is a story of the transparency of the body, where the warrior must find the inner harmony that allows the poisons of the world to pass through him. The fight is a moment of spiritual cleansing, as the destined one must battle a reflection of his own internal toxins. The sound of the water rippling is a single and harmonious note, signaling that the true immortality is found in the ability to change and grow. The experience in the Forgotten Valley ends with the destined one standing at the edge of the white waterfall, looking at the mist as it finally begins to lift, revealing the path to the western peaks. The vines of the valley have led to a sovereignty of the root. He carries the weight of the disciples' wisdom and the silence of the furnaces. The atmosphere is one of quiet and balanced resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of healing the self before one can save the world. The focus would now shift to the sun-drenched gorges of the west, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the golden cicada and face the ghosts of the first pilgrims. The final legacy of the Forgotten Valley of the Medicine King is a story of the beauty in the decay. You have seen the warrior walk through the graveyard of the alchemists and find the medicine within the root. You have felt the sting of the vapor and the weight of the moss. As the green mist fades behind you and the first red light of the western sun appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the leaf that falls to the earth, leaving behind the temple for a world of sand, sun, and the journey that continues to breathe. The journey moves away from the medicinal mists and into the sun-drenched gorges of the west, where the world is split between the deepest orange of the rock and the harshest white of the high sun. This is a land of verticality and echoes, where the heat is not a weight, but a constant, vibrating energy that hums against the skin. This experience is defined by the vibration of the cicada, where the atmosphere is one of radiant memory and shifting sands. This part of the history is a story of the golden cicada, a realization that the master of the original pilgrimage was once a being of pure spirit who shed his divine form 10 times to understand the suffering of the earth. The air here is thin and carries the scent of sun-baked stone, dried sage, and the faint, sweet smell of temple incense that seems to rise from the very cracks in the ground. The sound of the world is a high and constant drone. As the wind whistles through the narrow slits in the gorge walls, making the entire canyon feel like a temple of the air, where every breath is a prayer. As the Destined One walks along the narrow cliffside paths, the atmosphere shifts to one of spiritual vertigo. He reaches the terrace of the first step, where the stone is worn smooth by the feet of thousands of monks who once sought the path to the west. This is the era of the Golden Pilgrimage, where the atmosphere is one of dusty devotion and fatting gold. You see the remains of prayer wheels that no longer turn, and the ruins of small shrines carved into the vertical cliffs. This part of the history is a story of the weight of the vow, a realization that for many, the journey was a path of no return. The sound of the pebbles falling into the abyss is a sharp and lonely clatter, a sign that the mountain is slowly reclaiming the work of men. The Destined One moves with a fluid and precise grace, his staff balancing his weight against the shimmering heat of the void that opens up beside him. Deep within the grotto of the 10 shed skins, the atmosphere becomes golden and translucent. The walls are lined with the shimmering, amber-like remains of the cicadas' previous lives, each one a perfect shell of a being that has moved on to a higher plane. This is the trial of the shedding mind, where the atmosphere becomes one of lightness and mental clarity. The Destined One must navigate the chambers of light while avoiding the spectral monks who guard the shells. The sound of his own staff hitting the floor is a soft and muffled thud, as if the room is absorbing all sound to protect the silence of the transformation. This part of the history is a realization that in the gorges, attachment is a burden that will pull you into the depths. He feels the warmth of the light on his fur and the pressure of the silence in his ears, a feeling of total and weightless concentration. At the center of the highest gorge, the group encounters the remnant of the first disciple, a shadow of the monk who first followed the cicada into the west. The fight is a story of the rosary and the staff. The atmosphere is bright, sacred, and intense, as the spirit calls upon the power of the scriptures to create barriers of golden light that pulse with the rhythm of a heartbeat. This is the trial of the 11th sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of harmonious combat and spiritual rhythm. The Destined One must find the gap between the chants, his movements, a flow of fur and iron against the backdrop of the setting sun. The sound of the spirit's prayer is a deep and vibrating hum, making the gorge floor feel like it is rising toward the sky. When the spirit is finally at peace, the golden light fades into a soft and amber twilight, a realization that the first step of the journey was also the hardest. Leaving the grotto behind, the journey leads to the bridge of the 3 realms, a structure made of white jade that spans the widest part of the canyon. The atmosphere is majestic and fragile, a realization that the connection between the earth and the heavens is a thin and precarious path. This part of the history is a story of the cicada's compassion where the atmosphere is one of infinite horizon and gentle wind. You see the murals depicting the master as he shared his water with the demons and his bread with the hungry. A realization that the great strength of the pilgrimage was found in the softness of the heart. The air is cool and carries the taste of high altitudes and clean water. The sound of the wind through the jade railings is a high and musical note, signaling that the bridge of the spirit is open to those who carry no malice. The walk through the bridge plaza is a story of the betrayal of the light. You encounter a vision of the gods as they watch the pilgrimage from above, their faces indifferent to the suffering of the monks. This is a moment of raw and divine cruelty. The atmosphere is cold and pale, as the vision shows the moment the heavens decided that the cicadas' journey was a threat to their order. You feel the weight of the injustice and the heat of the indignation as you stand in the shadow of the past. This part of the history is a realization that the true enlightenment was found on the road, not in the temples of the sky. The sound of the vision's laughter is a sharp and jagged echo, making the warrior feel grounded and resolute in his defiance of the celestial plan. Deep in the heart of the Sunwell, the final trial of the gorges takes place in a chamber of pure radiance. The atmosphere is blinding and eternal, a realization that the sun is a fire that cleanses the soul of its shadows. This is a story of the transparency of the spirit, where the warrior must find the inner light that matches the glow of the cicada. The fight is a moment of spiritual fusion, as the destined one must battle a version of himself made of pure, golden energy. The sound of the light expanding is a single and harmonious roar, signaling that the true pilgrimage is an internal journey toward the center of the self. The experience in the sun-drenched gorges ends with the destined one standing at the far end of the jade bridge, looking at the stars as they begin to appear in the darkening sky. The heat of the gorges has led to a sovereignty of the light. He carries the weight of the cicada's memory and the silence of the pilgrims. The atmosphere is one of quiet and radiant resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of shedding the old before one can embrace the new. The focus would now shift to the forgotten cities of the Mud King, as the history prepared to explore the lore of the Earth Movers and face the ghosts of the giants. The final legacy of the sun-drenched gorges of the West is a story of the beauty in the ascent. You have seen the warrior walk through the grotto of the spirits and find the light within the shadow. You have felt the sting of the sun and the weight of the vow. As the golden light of the canyon fades behind you and the first scent of the damp earth appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the shell that is left behind, leaving behind the air for a world of mud, stone, and the journey that continues to build. The journey descends from the sun-drenched heights into the heavy, pressurized depths of the forgotten cities of the Mud King, a realm where the light of the sky is replaced by the dull, rhythmic glow of phosphorescent veins in the rock. This is a subterranean world built on a scale that defies human understanding. A place of cyclopean architecture and vast, echoing halls where the foundations of the mountains were once carved by the hands of giants. This experience is defined by the weight of the overburden, where the atmosphere is one of crushing permanence and ancient toil. This part of the history is a story of the earth movers, a realization that before the heavens were organized, there were beings of clay and silt who shaped the bones of the world. The air here is thick and humid, smelling of wet slate, cooling iron, and the deep, primordial scent of fertile mud. The sound of the world is a low and constant thrum, as the tectonic plates of the earth grind against one another, making the cities feel like a colossal, living machine that has been left to rust in the dark. As the destined one walks through the plaza of the first foundation, the atmosphere shifts to one of subterranean majesty. He reaches the statues of the original builders, figures so large that their knees are level with the tops of the stone temples. This is the era of the Mud King's reign, where the atmosphere is one of heavy labor and silent pride. You see the remains of the massive chisels and the iron sledges used to move the mountain roots, a realization that the world was bought with the sweat of the giants. This part of the history is a story of the forgotten architects, a realization that the heavens took the credit for a world they did not build. The sound of the water dripping from the ceiling into the dark pools below is a deep and echoing plonk, a sign that the earth is slowly reclaiming its treasures. The destined one moves with a steady and solid step, his staff hitting the stone with a hollow and resonant thud that echoes for miles through the empty streets. Deep within the gallery of the silt spinners, the atmosphere becomes viscous and slow. The walls are covered in a layer of fine, wet clay that seems to move with a life of its own, and the floor is a treacherous swamp of thick mud that pulls at the warrior's boots. This is the trial of the mired spirit, where the atmosphere becomes one of physical resistance and mental grit. The destined one must navigate the shifting sludge while avoiding the stone guardians that emerge from the walls like ghosts of the earth. The sound of his own movement is a squelching and heavy rhythmic slop, making the gallery feel like the inside of a lung. This part of the history is a realization that in the mud cities, struggle is the only way forward. He feels the cool dampness of the clay on his fur and the pressure of the deep in his chest, a feeling of total and submerged resolve. At the center of the great vault, the group encounters the Mud King himself, a being made of living stone and ancient sediment who has sat on his throne since the first mountain was raised. The fight is a story of the mountain and the staff. The atmosphere is deafening, violent, and primal as the king strikes the ground, causing the entire city to shake and pillars of rock to erupt from the floor. This is the trial of the 12th sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of seismic awareness and raw impact. The destined one must use the agility of the wind to stay above the crumbling earth, his staff striking the king's stone skin with a sharp and ringing impact. The sound of the earth breaking is a deep and terrifying roar, making the vault feel like it is closing its mouth. When the king is finally defeated, he does not die, but simply returns to the stone, a realization that the earth can never truly be conquered. Leaving the vault behind, the journey leads to the bridge of the molten core, a structure of black iron that spans a river of liquid fire deep in the crust. The atmosphere is industrial and scorching, a realization that the beauty of the surface is built upon a foundation of fire. This part of the history is a story of the giant's sacrifice, where the atmosphere is one of red glow and heavy iron. You see the murals depicting the giants as they channeled the heat of the earth to forge the first weapons of the gods, a realization that the tools of the heavens were born in the mud. The air is dry and carries the taste of sulfur and heated metal. The sound of the lava rushing below is a thick and constant gurgle, signaling that the heart of the world is still beating. The walk through the bridge grotto is a story of the betrayal of the builders. You encounter a vision of the gods as they cast the giants into the dark after the world was finished, fearful of the strength that could move mountains. This is a moment of raw and earthbound injustice. The atmosphere is cold and muffled as the vision shows the moment the mud cities were sealed away from the light. You feel the weight of the abandonment and the heat of the resentment as you stand in the shadow of the past. This part of the history is a realization that the stability of the heavens is built on the silencing of the deep. The sound of the vision's sighs is a low and vibrating note, making the warrior feel connected and heavy with the sorrow of the foundations. Deep in the heart of the claywell, the final trial of the cities takes place in a chamber of pure earth. The atmosphere is dark and fertile, a realization that the mud is the source of all life and the end of all things. This is a story of the return to the silt, where the warrior must find the inner weight that matches the gravity of the world. The fight is a moment of primal fusion, as the destined one must battle a version of himself made of living clay. The sound of the mud churning is a single and heavy roar, signaling that the true foundation is found in the acceptance of one's own mortality. The experience in the forgotten cities ends with the destined one standing at the base of a massive stone elevator, looking up at the shaft that leads back toward the light. The mud of the cities has led to a sovereignty of the stone. He carries the weight of the king's resolve and the silence of the foundations. The atmosphere is one of quiet and grounded resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of understanding the depth before one can reach the height. The focus would now shift to the mist-covered valleys of the Jade Emperor, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the celestial court and face the ghosts of the officials. The final legacy of the forgotten cities of the Mud King is a story of the beauty in the burden. You have seen the warrior walk through the halls of the giants and find the strength within the clay. You have felt the sting of the heat and the weight of the deep. As the dark glow of of the subterranean world fades behind you, and the first cool mist of the Jade Valley appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the footprint left in the mud, leaving behind the earth for a world of jade, spirits, and the journey that continues to climb. The journey ascends from the heavy, wet darkness of the mud cities into the high, ethereal atmosphere of the mist-covered valleys of the Jade Emperor. This is a realm of absolute order and terrifying bureaucracy, where the mountains are shaped like giant scrolls, and the waterfalls flow with the steady, rhythmic pace of a ticking clock. This experience is defined by the weight of the divine law, where the atmosphere is one of sterile perfection and chilling authority. This part of the history is a story of the celestial officials, a realization that the heavens are not just a place of peace, but a complex machine of rules, ledgers, and eternal judgments. The air here is thin and smells of old parchment, cold jade, and the sharp, clean scent of mountain snow. The sound of the world is a high and constant ringing. As the wind passes through the hollow jade pillars that line the valleys, making the entire landscape feel like a colossal, waiting courtroom, where every action is recorded by an unseen brush. As the destined one walks along the paths of white marble, the atmosphere shifts to one of institutional dread. He reaches the gate of the infinite ledger, where the names of every living being are carved into the cliffside in characters that glow with a pale, unforgiving light. This is the era of the Great Audit, where the atmosphere is one of bureaucratic coldness and measured steps. You see the remains of the massive inkwells and the stone desks where the clerks of the heavens once sat, a realization that the gods view the world as a collection of debts and merits. This part of the history is a story of the paper chains, a realization that the most difficult prisons to escape are those built with laws rather than iron. The sound of the wind rustling the leaves of the book trees is a sharp and paper-like scratched note, a sign that the heavens are always watching for a mistake. The destined one moves with a low and defensive posture, his staff held ready as the cold light of the jade reflects in his focused eyes. Deep within the hall of the 3,000 judgments, the atmosphere becomes static and formal. The walls are lined with thousands of small golden mirrors that reflect not the face of the warrior, but the consequences of his actions. This is the trial of the unseen jury, where the atmosphere becomes one of psychological pressure and moral weight. The destined one must navigate the maze of mirrors while avoiding the spectral ink beasts that emerge from the floor to drag him into the ledgers. The sound of his own staff hitting the marble is a sharp and ringing echo, making the hall feel like it is amplifying every sin. This part of the history is a realization that in the Jade Valleys, conscience is the sharpest blade. He feels the icy smoothness of the stone on his fur and the thinness of the spirit air in his lungs, a feeling of total and judged isolation. At the center of the Grand Secretariat, the group encounters the chief minister of the stars, a being whose robes are made of starlight and whose face is a blank mask of white jade. The fight is a story of the brush and the staff. The atmosphere is blinding, rapid, and intellectual, as the minister writes characters in the air that turn into physical barriers or bolts of white energy. This is the trial of the 13th sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of predictive strategy and mental speed. The destined one must find the flaw in the law, his movements a blur of defiance against the rigid patterns of the celestial magic. The sound of the magic exploding is a high and musical crack, making the secretariat feel like it is shattering like glass. When the minister is finally brought to his knees, his robes dissolve into a shower of empty scrolls, a realization that the authority of the heavens is only as strong as the belief of those who follow it. Leaving the hall behind, the journey leads to the garden of the eternal balance, a place where the trees are made of silver and the fruits are made of gold, balanced perfectly on branches that never sway. The atmosphere is beautiful and lifeless, a realization that absolute order is a form of death. This part of the history is a story of the sages' rebellion against the clock, where the atmosphere is one of shattered symmetry and wild growth. You see the spots where Wukong once uprooted the trees and tossed the golden fruits into the mud, a realization that the monkey's chaos was a gift of life to a world that had forgotten how to change. The air is cool and carries the taste of cold metal and sweet dust. The sound of the wind through the silver leaves is a thin and artificial tinkle, signaling that the spirit of the garden is a fabrication. The walk through the garden altar is a story of the cost of the mandate. You encounter a vision of the officials as they spent eternity balancing the accounts of the world, their own lives fatting until they became nothing more than living pens. This is a moment of raw and tragic monotony. The atmosphere is pale and gray, as the vision shows the moment the officials realized that their divinity was a desk. You feel the weight of the routine and the coldness of the immortality as you stand in the shadow of the past. This part of the history is a realization that the glory of the Jade Emperor is a burdensome crown shared by all who serve him. The sound of the vision's sighs is a long and resonant note, making the warrior feel heavy and tired with the boredom of the gods. Deep in the heart of the Jade Well, the final trial of the valleys takes place in a chamber of absolute law. The atmosphere is blinding and sterile, a realization that the law is a cage for the heart. This is a story of the breaking of the ledger, where the warrior must find the internal freedom that allows him to exist outside the rules of the stars. The fight is a moment of existential combat, as the destined one must battle a version of himself that is perfect, obedient, and hollow. The sound of the jade cracking is a deep and terrifying snap, signaling that the true spirit is found in the willingness to be imperfect. The experience in the mist-covered valleys ends with the destined one standing at the edge of a cliff made of white scroll stone, looking at the clouds as they swirl in the patterns of ancient calligraphy. The jade of the valleys has led to a sovereignty of the will. He carries the weight of the minister's defeat and the silence of the court. The atmosphere is one of quiet and unyielding resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of reclaiming the pen to write one's own destiny. The focus would now shift to the blood-red gorges of the iron fans, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the Rakshasi's kin and face the ghosts of the warlords. The final legacy of the mist-covered valleys of the Jade Emperor is a story of the beauty in the disorder. You have seen the warrior walk through the halls of the heavens and find the life within the law. You have felt the sting of the cold stone and the weight of the judgment. As the white mist fades behind you and the first red light of the iron gorges appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the ink that smudges on the page, leaving behind the bureaucracy for a world of iron, blood, and the journey that continues to rebel. The journey moves away from the cold, sterile halls of the jade bureaucracy and into the blood-red gorges of the iron fans, a place where the mountains look like serrated blades of rusted metal, and the very air tastes of a long-forgotten war. This is a land of eternal twilight, lit by the glowing embers of the cooling volcanic earth and the faint crimson shimmer of the iron-rich dust that hangs in the wind. This experience is defined by the vibration of the war drum, where the atmosphere is one of primal honor and smoldering conflict. This part of the history is a story of the demonic warlords, a realization that those labeled as monsters by the heavens were often just the fierce protectors of the mortal boundaries, fighting for the right to exist in a world that wanted them erased. The air here is hot and dry, smelling of scorched copper, old leather, and the heavy, metallic scent of dried blood on stone. The sound of the world is a low and constant grumble, as the tectonic plates of the iron mountains shift and groan, making the entire gorge feel like a giant, sleeping fortress that has never truly laid down its arms. As the destined one walks through the canyon of the broken spears, the atmosphere shifts to one of martial mourning. He reaches the remains of the great fortifications where the Rakshasi's kin once stood against the heavenly host. This is the era of the iron resistance, where the atmosphere is one of shattered steel and unbroken will. You see the massive iron fans, now rusted and stationary, that were once used to create hurricanes to blow the celestial chariots out of the sky. This part of the history is a story of the forgotten vow, a realization that the warlords fought not for conquest, but for the sanctity of the soil. The sound of the wind whistling through the holes in the rusted iron is a high and mournful note, a sign that the ghosts of the warriors are still standing at their posts. The destined one moves with a heavy and resolute stride, his staff leaving deep marks in the red dust as the flicker of the embers reflects the fire in his own heart. Deep within the foundry of the first flame, the atmosphere becomes intense and claustrophobic. The walls are lined with the cooling molds of weapons that were never finished, and the air is thick with the taste of soot and molten iron. This is the trial of the unyielding forge, where the atmosphere becomes one of physical heat and spiritual tempering. The destined one must navigate the narrow catwalks above the lava pits, while avoiding the spectral smiths who continue to hammer away at the shadows of the past. The sound of the hammers hitting the anvils is a sharp and rhythmic clang, making the foundry feel like the inside of a beating war heart. This part of the history is a realization that in the iron gorges, strength is forged in the fire of adversity. He feels the singing heat on his fur and the weight of the iron air in his lungs, a feeling of total and hardened focus. At the center of the crimson arena, the group encounters the remnant of the iron-horned general, a massive warrior whose armor has fused with his own skin through centuries of combat. The fight is a story of the shield and the staff. The atmosphere is violent, raw, and deafening as the general strikes with a weapon made from the backbone of a mountain, creating shockwaves that tear through the red stone floor. This is the trial of the 14th sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of structural awareness and brute endurance. The destined one must find the fracture in the iron, his movements a blur of kinetic energy against the relentless pressure of the general strikes. The sound of the wood hitting the metal is a deep and resonant boom, making the arena feel like it is ringing like a bell. When the general is finally brought to his knees, he does not fall, but turns to a statue of solid iron, a realization that the legacy of the warrior is as permanent as the mountain itself. Leaving the arena behind, the journey leads to the gallery of the Rakshasi's grief, a series of tunnels where the walls are covered in tapestries woven from the hair of the fallen. The atmosphere is somber and intimate, a realization that every warlord was a father, a son, or a brother. This part of the history is a story of the price of the iron fan, where the atmosphere is one of faded red silk and lingering tears. You see the murals depicting the Rakshasi as she watched her family being scattered by the winds of the heavens, a realization that her coldness was a shield against the pain of 1,000 losses. The air is still and carries the taste of salt and old dust. The sound of the wind through the tapestries is a soft and hissing whisper, signaling that the memory of the heart is more durable than any metal. The walk through the palace of the smoldering embers is a story of the last stand. You encounter a vision of the warlords as they gathered for their final council, knowing that the heavens would eventually break through their defenses. This is a moment of raw and heroic despair. The atmosphere is dim and smoky, as the vision shows the moment they chose to become the mountain, rather than surrender their freedom. You feel the weight of the loyalty and the heat of the final defiance as you stand in the shadow of the past. This part of the history is a realization that the glory of the Demon Kings was found in their willingness to fall. The sound of the vision's final shout is a long and echoing roar, making the warrior feel grounded and powerful with the strength of the earth. Deep in the heart of the Iron Well, the final trial of the gorges takes place in a chamber of pure metal. The atmosphere is heavy and magnetic, a realization that the iron is the bone of the world and the core of the spirit. This is a story of the tempering of the soul, where the warrior must find the inner steel that allows him to carry the weight of the history without breaking. The fight is a moment of primal impact, as the Destined One must battle a version of himself made of jagged, rusted iron. The sound of the metal grinding is a deep and terrifying scrape, signaling that the true warrior is found in the ability to remain sharp even when the world tries to dull the spirit. The experience in the blood-red gorges ends with the Destined One standing on a bridge of fused obsidian, looking at the horizon where the red dust meets the black sky. The iron of the gorges has led to a sovereignty of the bone. He carries the weight of the general's honor and the silence of the foundry. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of becoming the weapon that will cut through the divine law. The focus would now shift to the ghost-light marshes of the nine-tailed fox, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the shapeshifters and face the ghosts of the tricksters. The final legacy of the blood-red gorges of the Iron Fans is a story of the beauty in the scarred steel. You have seen the warrior walk through the halls of the warlords and find the honor within the demon. You have felt the sting of the heat and the weight of the iron. As the red glow of the gorge fades behind you and the first pale light of the marshes appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the sparks that fly from the anvil, leaving behind the war for a world of mist, mirrors, and the journey that continues to shift. The journey moves away from the hardened iron of the gorges and descends into the ghost-light marshes of the nine-tailed fox, a land where the boundary between the physical world and the realm of dreams has worn thin. This is a region of endless, shallow waters and gnarled willow trees that weep silver sap into the dark mud. This experience is defined by the lure of the pale flame, where the atmosphere is one of shifting illusions and seductive shadows. This part of the history is a story of the shapeshifters, a realization that those who can change their faces often do so to protect a heart that has been broken too many times by the cold truth of the heavens. The air here is cool and thick with the scent of damp earth, blooming night lotus, and the faint, sweet smell of fox musk that lingers in the fog. The sound of the world is a low and constant rippling, as if the water itself is whispering secrets to the roots of the trees, making the entire marsh feel like a colossal, living mirror that reflects not what you are, but what you most desire to see. As the Destined One walks through the path of the flickering tails, the atmosphere shifts to one of quiet playfulness and hidden teeth. He reaches the remains of the ancient shrines where the fox spirits once gathered to dance under the moon. This is the era of the Great Masquerade, where the atmosphere is one of faded silk and lingering laughter. You see the stone masks of foxes and humans scattered in the mud, their expressions caught in a permanent state of trickery. This part of the history is a story of the fox's love, a realization that many of these spirits were hunted not for their mischief, but for the pure emotion they were capable of feeling. The sound of a distant bell ringing across the water is a high and fragile note, a sign that the spirits are still leading the unwary into the deep. The destined one moves with a soft and wary grace, his staff held low as the dance of the ghost lights creates 1,000 false paths in the silver mist. Deep within the grotto of the 1,000 faces, the atmosphere becomes distorted and intimate. The walls are lined with natural mirrors of obsidian that show the warrior as a child, a king, a monster, and a god all at once. This is the trial of the fluid self, where the atmosphere becomes one of internal confusion and spiritual hunger. The destined one must navigate the maze of reflections while avoiding the fox shadows that try to steal his breath with a kiss. The sound of his own footsteps is a muffled and double beat, as if he is being followed by a version of himself he has not yet met. This part of the history is a realization that in the marshes, truth is a mask that has been worn too long. He feels the cool dampness of the mist on his fur and the pressure of the illusion in his mind, a feeling of total and shifting uncertainty. At the center of the moon-drowned plaza, the group encounters the remnant of the nine-tailed matriarch, a being of immense beauty and terrible sorrow, who once nearly tricked the Jade Emperor into giving up his throne. The fight is a story of the mirror and the staff. The atmosphere is whirling, ethereal, and silver, as the matriarch splits into 9 different forms, each one representing a different emotion from her long life. This is the trial of the 15th sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of emotional discernment and rapid intuition. The destined one must find the real heart among the shadows of joy, grief, rage, and fear. The sound of the matriarch's laughter turning into a sob is a deep and vibrating chord, making the plaza feel like it is drowning in a sea of memories. When the matriarch is finally brought to rest, she turns into a pile of white petals, a realization that the power of the trickster was only a way to hide the fragility of the soul. Leaving the plaza behind, the journey leads to the Bridge of the Lost Lovers, a structure made of woven willow branches that spans the widest part of the marsh. The atmosphere is fragile and melancholy, a realization that even the most clever spirits often lose the things they love most. This part of the history is a story of the fox and the scholar, where the atmosphere is one of faded ink and sunken dreams. You see the murals depicting the stories of spirits who tried to live among humans, only to be cast out by the fear of the unknown. The air is still and carries the taste of rain and old honey. The sound of the water lapping against the willow is a soft and rhythmic sigh, signaling that the longing of the spirit is a tide that never goes out. The walk through the palace of the pale flame is a story of the final illusion. You encounter a vision of the shapeshifters as they were before the heavens sent the spirit hunters to purge the marshes. This is a moment of raw and ghostly beauty. The atmosphere is luminescent and warm, as the vision shows the moment the foxes decided to hide in the fog, forever rather than lose their true nature. You feel the weight of the isolation and the heat of the defiance as you stand in the shadow of the past. This part of the history is a realization that the cleverness of the trickster was their only weapon against the divine. The sound of the vision's song is a high and lingering melody, making the warrior feel light and floating with the spirit of the marsh. Deep in the heart of the ghost well, the final trial of the marshes takes place in a chamber of pure reflection. The atmosphere is silver and blinding, a realization that the mirror of the world is only a reflection of the mirror of the heart. This is a story of the clarity of the mask, where the warrior must find the fixed point within his own shifting nature. The fight is a moment of psychological fusion, as the destined one must battle a version of himself that can change into every enemy he has ever faced. The sound of the mirrors shattering is a sharp and high scream, signaling that the true face is found in the willingness to be seen as you truly are. The experience in the ghostlight marshes ends with the destined one standing on a dock of silver wood, looking at the moon as it is reflected in the perfectly still water. The mist of the marshes has led to a sovereignty of the dream. He carries the weight of the matriarch's secret and the silence of the willow. The atmosphere is one of quiet and reflective resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of seeing through the veils before one can touch the stone. The focus would now shift to the thunder-capped peaks of the 5 elements, as the history prepared to revisit the prison of the sage and face the ghosts of the Buddha's seal. The final legacy of the ghostlight marshes of the 9-tailed fox is a story of the beauty in the unseen. You have seen the warrior walk through the halls of the tricksters and find the truth within the mask. You have felt the sting of the cold mist and the weight of the dream. As the silver light of the marsh fades behind you and the first massive shadows of the mountain peaks appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the ripple that fades on the water, leaving behind the illusions for a world of stone, gravity, and the journey that continues to find its way home. The journey moves away from the shifting mists of the fox marshes and begins the heavy, vertical climb toward the thunder-capped peaks of the 5 elements. This is a place where the geography itself feels like a physical manifestation of divine weight, a mountain range that looks like the 5 fingers of a colossal hand pressed firmly down upon the chest of the earth. This experience is defined by the pressure of the divine seal, where the atmosphere is one of ancient imprisonment and unyielding gravity. This part of the history is a story of the 500 years, a realization that the great sage spent centuries trapped beneath this very stone, watching the seasons turn and the world change while he remained frozen in a cage of earth and sky. The air here is thin and tastes of cold iron and old copper, vibrating with a low frequency that makes the teeth ache and the mind feel slow. The sound of the world is a muffled and constant groan, as if the mountain is still actively exerting its force to keep a ghost in the ground, making the entire range feel like a colossal waiting tomb that has not yet finished its work. As the destined one walks through the valley of the crushed spirit, the atmosphere shifts to one of quiet endurance. He reaches the base of the first peak, where the stone is covered in golden Sanskrit characters that pulse with a faint, rhythmic light every time the wind blows. This is the era of the great stillness, where the atmosphere is one of patience and eternal waiting. You see the small, hollowed-out caves where the local mountain gods once brought copper juice and iron pills to the prisoner, a realization that even in his lowest moment, the sage was never truly alone. This part of the history is a story of the humiliation of the heavens, a realization that the gods did not just want to stop the monkey, they wanted to break the very idea of his freedom. The sound of the wind through the high crags is a low and hollow whistle, like a breath caught in a throat of stone. The destined one moves with a sturdy and weighted step, his staff dragging behind him as the force of the seal tries to pull him toward the center of the mountain. Deep within the ravine of the copper juice, the atmosphere becomes metallic and bitter. The water here flows with a reddish-orange hue, and the rocks are stained with the residue of the celestial punishment. This is the trial of the fivefold burden, where the atmosphere becomes one of physical exhaustion and mental resistance. The destined one must navigate the narrow ledges, while the golden characters on the walls glow brighter, casting a light that feels as heavy as a leaden blanket on his shoulders. The sound of his own breathing is a raucous and labored note in the thin air, making the ravine feel like the inside of a lung filled with sand. This part of the history is a realization that in the peaks of the five elements, survival is a form of rebellion. He feels the cramp in the muscles and the sharpness of the cold iron in his lungs, a feeling of total and grounded suffering. At the center of the prison plateau, the group encounters the remnant of the Golden Seal Guardian, a being made of pure, solidified light and celestial law, who has stood watch since the first day of Wukong's sentence. The fight is a story of the law and the outlaw. The atmosphere is static, blinding, and oppressive, as the Guardian uses the weight of the mountain itself to try and pin the warrior to the ground. This is the trial of the 16th sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of internal leverage and spiritual density. The destined one must find the fracture in the divine will, his movements a slow and powerful grind against the crushing force of the sky. The sound of the staff hitting the light shield is a deep and final boom, making the plateau feel like it is sinking into the earth. When the Guardian is finally shattered, the golden characters on the cliffs fade for the first time in centuries, a realization that the debt of the sage has finally been paid in full. Leaving the plateau behind, the journey leads to the grotto of the root feeders, a series of tunnels where the roots of the world tree have grown around the place where Wukong's head once emerged from the stone. The atmosphere is damp, dark, and root-heavy, a realization that the earth itself tried to comfort the prisoner while the heavens ignored him. This part of the history is a story of the moss and the memory, where the atmosphere is one of soft decay and ancient patience. You see the spot where the grass grew into the monkey's fur and the birds built nests in his ears, a realization that the great sage became one with the soil of the mortal world. The air is cool and carries the taste of wet earth and bitter bark. The sound of the roots shifting in the dark is a soft and creaking sigh, signaling that the patience of the earth is longer than the anger of the gods. The walk through the path of the released spirit is a story of the day the mountain cracked. You encounter a vision of the moment the Tang monk arrived to pull the seal away, the stone exploding as the sage leaped back into the sky. This is a moment of raw and explosive freedom. The atmosphere is violent and bright, as the vision shows the dust settling to reveal the monkey as he was, thin, scarred, but with eyes that still held the fire of 1,000 suns. You feel the heat of the release and the lightness of the air as you stand in the shadow of the past. This part of the history is a realization that the true power of the sage was not his magic, but his ability to wait for the right moment. The sound of the vision's first shout of freedom is a high and piercing note, making the warrior feel light and buoyant with the spirit of the ascent. Deep in the heart of the elemental well, the final trial of the peaks takes place in a chamber of absolute gravity. The atmosphere is dark and crushing, a realization that the weight of the world is the only thing that keeps the spirit from drifting away. This is a story of the center of the stone, where the warrior must find the internal weight that allows him to remain himself even when the universe tries to flatten him. The fight is a moment of structural fusion, as the destined one must battle a version of himself made of solid, unbreakable jade. The sound of the bones popping is a sharp and jagged snap, signaling that the true strength is found in the ability to carry the burden without being crushed by it. The experience in the Thundercap Peaks ends with the destined one standing on the highest finger of the mountain, looking out over the world he has traveled. The stone of the peaks has led to a sovereignty of the bone. He carries the weight of the sage's patience and the silence of the 5 centuries. The atmosphere is one of quiet and absolute resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of lasting through the dark before one can claim the light. The focus would now shift to the sunless gorges of the Lion Camel Ridge, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the 3 great kings and face the ghosts of the monstrous brotherhood. The final legacy of the Thundercap Peaks of the 5 elements is a story of the beauty in the endurance. You have seen the warrior walk through the prison of the gods and find the freedom within the stone. You have felt the sting of the copper juice and the weight of the mountain. As the golden glow of the Sanskrit characters fades behind you and the first dark shadows of the Lion Ridge appear on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the cracked shell of the mountain, leaving behind the prison for a world of monsters, brotherhood, and the journey that continues to endure. The journey moves away from the weight of the divine peaks and enters the sunless gorges of the Lion Camel Ridge, a place where the mountains are carved into the shapes of screaming faces, and the very earth feels like a battlefield that never stopped burning. This is the domain of the three great demon kings, the azure lion, the yellow-toothed elephant, and the golden-winged peng, the most formidable brotherhood to ever challenge the heavens. This experience is defined by the shadow of the Great Alliance, where the atmosphere is one of savage majesty and draconian rule. This part of the history is a story of the three sovereigns, a realization that for a brief moment in time, the demons created a kingdom that rivaled the celestial court in both power and cruelty. The air here is thick and carries the scent of roasted meat, old blood, and the acrid smoke of 1,000 campfire pits. The sound of the world is a constant and low growl, as if the ridge itself is a living beast that is perpetually hungry, making the entire gorge feel like a colossal, waiting maw that has swallowed the sun. As the destined one walks through the valley of the white bones, the atmosphere shifts to one of brutal scale. He reaches the remains of the great citadel, where the walls are built from the skulls of those who dared to resist the Brotherhood. This is the era of the monstrous kingdom, where the atmosphere is one of raw strength and fearful order. You see the massive iron cauldrons and the broken banners of the demon armies, a realization that the Lion Camel Ridge was once the center of a world where might was the only law. This part of the history is a story of the Brotherhood of the Claw, a realization that even monsters have their own codes of loyalty and honor. The sound of the wind howling through the hollow bone walls is a high and screeching note, a sign that the ridge has not forgotten the cries of the fallen. The destined one moves with a sturdy and balanced power, his staff held firm as the flicker of the demon fires casts long, dancing shadows across the blood-stained rock. Deep within the cavern of the piercing tusk, the atmosphere becomes damp and trembling. The walls are made of solid gray stone that has been polished by the passage of the great elephant's massive form, and the air is thick with the taste of salt and musky fear. This is the trial of the unstoppable weight, where the atmosphere becomes one of physical pressure and rhythmic crushing. The destined one must navigate the narrow passages while avoiding the sudden, seismic tremors caused by the ghost of the Elephant King. The sound of the footsteps in the deep is a deep and bone-shaking thud, making the cavern feel like the inside of a beating heart of stone. This part of the history is a realization that in the Lion Camel Ridge, Fortitude is the only shield against the weight of the past. He feels the cold vibration in the feet and the heaviness of the humid air in his lungs, a feeling of total and grounded struggle. At the center of the Azure Terrace, the group encounters the remnant of the Azure Lion, a warrior king of immense size, whose roar once sent the heavenly soldiers scattering like dry leaves. The fight is a story of the mane and the staff. The atmosphere is violent, raw, and deafening, as the lion strikes with a blade that can cut through the clouds, his movements a blur of fur and blue steel. This is the trial of the 17th sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of predatory reflex and wild intensity. The destined one must find the stillness within the roar, his movements a fluid counterstrike against the savage power of the king. The sound of the staff hitting the lion's armor is a sharp and ringing echo, making the terrace feel like it is shattering under the force of the king. When the lion is finally brought to his knees, he does not beg, but lets out one final, defiant cry, a realization that the spirit of the predator can never be truly tamed. Leaving the terrace behind, the journey leads to the nest of the Golden Wing, a series of platforms built into the highest spikes of the ridge, where the wind never stops. The atmosphere is vast, airy, and terrifying, a realization that the golden-winged Peng was a being of celestial speed who considered the world his hunting ground. This part of the history is a story of the third brother's pride, where the atmosphere is one of high velocity and cutting gales. You see the murals depicting the Peng as he swallowed entire cities in a single breath, a realization that his cruelty was as infinite as the sky. The air is cool and carries the taste of high altitudes and iron. The sound of the wind through the feathers of the stone statues is a high and whistling note, signaling that the eye of the eagle is still watching for a weakness. The walk through the palace of the Three Kings is a story of the broken alliance. You encounter a vision of the moment the great sage arrived to break the brotherhood, the three kings turning on each other in their desperation to survive. This is a moment of raw and tragic betrayal. The atmosphere is gray and smoky, as the vision shows the moment the Lion Camel Ridge fell into ruin. You feel the weight of the regret and the heat of the lost glory as you stand in the shadow of the past. This part of the history is a realization that even the strongest brotherhood can be broken by the seed of doubt. The sound of the vision's final argument is a deep and vibrating drone, making the warrior feel grounded and heavy with the weight of the failed kingdom. Deep in the heart of the Bonewell, the final trial of the ridge takes place in a chamber of pure instinct. The atmosphere is dark and primal, a realization that the beast within is the most dangerous enemy of all. This is a story of the sovereignty of the claw, where the warrior must find the human heart that separates him from the monsters of the ridge. The fight is a moment of primal fusion, as the destined one must battle a version of himself that has given in to the hunger for power. The sound of the teeth gnashing is a sharp and jagged note, signaling that the true king is found in the ability to rule oneself. The experience in the Lion Camel Ridge ends with the destined one standing at the edge of the highest precipice, looking out at the sun as it finally begins to peek over the blackened mountains. The blood of the gorges has led to a sovereignty of the spirit. He carries the weight of the three kings' legacy and the silence of the citadel. The atmosphere is one of quiet and hardened resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of confronting the beast before one can claim the crown. The focus would now shift to the golden fields of the Lion Prince, as the history prepared to follow the trail of the nine-headed lion and face the ghosts of the ancestral spirits. The final legacy of the sunless gorges of the Lion Camel Ridge is a story of the beauty in the savage. You have seen the warrior walk through the graveyard of the kings and find the honor within the beast. You have felt the sting of the smoke and the weight of the bone. As the dark shadows of the ridge fade behind you and the first golden light of the plains appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the roar that fades into the wind, leaving behind the monsters for a world of gold, ancestors, and the journey that continues to climb. The journey moves away from the savage shadows of the three kings and enters the golden fields of the Lion Prince, a vast and rolling landscape where the tall grass shines like polished brass under a permanent, late afternoon sun. This is a realm that exists on the threshold of the spirit world, a place of ancestral memory and golden light where the boundary between the living and the dead is as thin as a blade of summer grass. This experience is defined by the call of the nine-headed roar, where the atmosphere is one of ancient wisdom and spectral gold. This part of the history is a story of the great ancestor, a realization that the nine-headed lion was not a monster of hunger, but a guardian of the gates who could see into 9 different realms at once. The air here is warm and carries the scent of ripening grain, dry earth, and the faint, sweet smell of yellow chrysanthemums. The sound of the world is a low and constant rustle. As the wind moves through the endless fields, making the entire region feel like a colossal, breathing sea of gold that remembers every soul that has ever passed through its gates. As the destined one walks through the path of the 9 paths, the atmosphere shifts to one of quiet reverence. He reaches the remains of the spirit shrines, where the ancestors were once honored with offerings of wine and incense. This is the era of the Spirit Gate, where the atmosphere is one of faded glory and lingering protection. You see the stone statues of the 9 lion heads, each one facing a different direction to watch over the souls of the departed, a realization that the Lion Prince was a being of immense responsibility. This part of the history is a story of the weight of the watcher, a realization that to see everything is to carry the sorrow of every world. The sound of the distant lion bells ringing in the wind is a high and clear note, a sign that the spirits are still keeping their vigil. The destined one moves with a soft and grounded step, his staff brushing against the golden stalks as the radiance of the sun reflects the clarity of his own purpose. Deep within the grotto of the 9 reflections, the atmosphere becomes shimmering and infinite. The walls are made of a crystalline rock that splits the light into 9 different colors, and the air is thick with the taste of cold spring water and ancient dust. This is the trial of the multifaceted soul, where the atmosphere becomes one of vast perspective and mental expansion. The destined one must navigate the chambers of light, while his own image is reflected and multiplied. A realization that he is the sum of all who came before him. The sound of his own movement is a soft and echoing whisper, as if the mountain is repeating his thoughts in 9 different tongues. This part of the history is a realization that in the golden fields, identity is a river fed by 1,000 streams. He feels the warmth of the spirit light on his fur and the pressure of the infinite in his mind, a feeling of total and expanded awareness. At the center of the ancestral altar, the group encounters the remnant of the 9-headed lion, a being of colossal size, whose 9 manes flow like rivers of gold, and whose 18 eyes glow with the light of the stars. The fight is a story of the roar and the staff. The atmosphere is majestic, overwhelming, and harmonious, as the lion attacks not with claws, but with the voice of the 9 realms, creating waves of sound that can shatter stone and heal the spirit at the same time. This is the trial of the 18th sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of total sensory synthesis and spiritual rhythm. The destined one must find the silent center of the 9 roars, his movements a fluid and precise dance against the backdrop of the golden sky. The sound of the staff hitting the lion's mane is a deep and resonant note, making the altar feel like a bell that rings for the universe. When the lion is finally at peace, he dissolves into a shower of golden leaves, a realization that the guardian of the gate has finally found his own rest. Leaving the altar behind, the journey leads to the bridge of the Spirit River, a structure made of white bone and golden silk that spans the river, separating the fields from the underworld. The atmosphere is fragile and eternal, a realization that the path to the end is a bridge of memories. This part of the history is a story of the Lion Prince's mercy, where the atmosphere is one of infinite horizon and gentle current. You see the murals depicting the lion as he carried the souls of the lost across the water, a realization that his power was a tool of compassion. The air is cool and carries the taste of salt and old flowers. The sound of the water lapping against the bone piers is a soft and rhythmic sigh, signaling that the river of time is always moving toward the sea. Walk through the bridge plaza is a story of the final goodbye. You encounter a vision of the ancestors as they gathered to watch the destined one pass, their faces filled with a quiet and hopeful expectation. This is a moment of raw and ancestral connection. The atmosphere is golden and hazy. As the vision shows the moment, the destined one realized that he was carrying the hopes of the fallen with him. You feel the weight of the legacy and the heat of the purpose as you stand in the shadow of the past. This part of the history is a realization that the true journey is a return to the source of the spirit. The sound of the vision's soft chanting is a low and vibrating chord, making the warrior feel grounded and infinite with the strength of his kin. Deep in the heart of the spirit well, the final trial of the fields takes place in a chamber of pure light. The atmosphere is blinding and sacred, a realization that the spirit is a fire that can never be extinguished. This is a story of the sovereignty of the soul, where the warrior must find the eternal flame within his own heart. The fight is a moment of spiritual fusion, as the destined one must battle a version of himself made of pure, radiant gold. The sound of the light hum is a single and harmonious note, signaling that the true ancestor is found in the ability to honor the past while creating the future. The experience in the golden fields ends with the destined one standing at the far end of the bone bridge, looking at the stars as they begin to appear in the darkening sky. The gold of the fields has led to a sovereignty of the memory. He carries the weight of the nine-headed roar and the silence of the spirit river. The atmosphere is one of quiet and radiant resolve, a realization that the path to the great sage is a path of honoring the dead before one can claim the life of the legend. The focus would now shift to the final peak of the Mount Huguo, as the history prepared to face the final trial and witness the rebirth of the myth. The final legacy of the golden fields of the Lion Prince is a story of the beauty in the return. You have seen the warrior walk through the fields of the ancestors and find the light within the shadow. You have felt the sting of the sun and the weight of the legacy. As the golden light of the plains fades behind you and the first cool mist of the home mountain appears on the horizon, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The story of the Black Myth finds its final and grounded resolution in the leaf that floats on the river, leaving behind the fields for a world of clouds, stone, and the journey that has finally found its way home. The journey completes its grand circle, returning to the absolute summit of Mount Huguo, where the world ends and the vast, indifferent sky begins. This is the peak of the primal stone, a place where the air is so thin it feels like breathing diamond dust, and the silence is so heavy it rings in the ears like a funeral bell. This experience is defined by the finality of the shell, where the atmosphere is one of shattered divinity and absolute solitude. This part of the history is a story of the empty throne, a realization that the great sage is no longer a man or a demon, but a collection of memories and regrets held together by a suit of golden armor. The air here is freezing, smelling of ancient snow, lightning scorched rock, and the faint, bitter scent of dried peach blossoms from a spring that happened 1,000 years ago. The sound of the world is a high and mournful whistle, as the wind carves through the jagged peaks, making the summit feel like a giant, hollow ribcage. where the heart of the mountain has stopped beating. As the destined one climbs the final steps carved into the living rock, the atmosphere shifts to one of cosmic weight. He reaches the plateau of the sitting sage, where the stone is cracked in the shape of a massive lotus. This is the era of the final rest, where the atmosphere is one of stone-cold peace and lingering power. You see the remains of the great sage's armor, the phoenix feather cap, the gold chain mail, and the cloud-walking boots, sitting perfectly still upon a weathered rock, a realization that the hero has become a monument. This part of the history is a story of the legacy of the spirit, a realization that the heavens did not kill Wukong. They simply waited for him to grow tired of the world. The sound of the pebbles shifting under the warrior's feet is a sharp and final clatter, a sign that the mountain is watching its new master. The destined one moves with a slow and heavy reverence, his staff glowing with the total light of the 6 relics, as he prepares to face the ghost of his own soul. Deep within the chamber of the primal egg, the atmosphere becomes void-like and eternal. The walls are not made of stone, but of a swirling, dark energy that reflects the birth of the stars, and the floor is a mirror of black water that does not ripple. This is the trial of the great return, where the atmosphere becomes one of absolute self-awareness and spiritual stripping. The destined one must stand before the shell of the sage, a realization that to inherit the power, he must first accept the emptiness of the crown. The sound of his own heart beating is the only rhythm in the universe, making the chamber feel like the inside of the first seed. This part of the history is a realization that at the end of all things, identity is the final illusion that must be broken. He feels the bite of the absolute cold on his skin and the weight of the void in his chest, a feeling of total and infinite readiness. At the very peak of the myth, the group encounters the great sage's broken shell, a towering figure of stone and golden light that wields a staff made of pure intention. The fight is a story of the echo and the voice. The atmosphere is deafening, blinding, and transcendent, as the shell uses the memories of 1,000 battles to rewrite the laws of the summit, turning the air into iron and the ground into clouds. This is the trial of the infinite sense, where the atmosphere becomes one of perfect fluidity and timeless combat. The destined one must fight not to defeat his predecessor, but to become the reflection, his movements, a perfect harmony of iron and will, against the backdrop of the collapsing sky. The sound of the 2 staves clashing is a single and universal note, making the mountain feel like it is dissolving into light. When the shell finally shatters, it does not explode, but melts into the destined one like rain into the earth. A realization that the Black Myth was always a story about the self finding the self, leaving the shattered plateau behind. The journey leads to the waterfall of the new beginning, where the water flows upward toward the stars. The atmosphere is light and miraculous, a realization that the end of the journey is merely the first step of a new path. This part of the history is a story of the unwritten chapter, where the atmosphere is one of deep blue sky and golden sun. You see the destined one standing at the edge of the world, no longer a seeker or a warrior, but the living breath of the mountain. The air is sweet and carries the taste of fresh peaches and cold mist. The sound of the wind is a soft and triumphant melody, signaling that the chain of the golden hoop has been replaced by the freedom of the wild. The walk through the final gate is a story of the sage reborn. You see the destined one look back at the path he has traveled, the deserts, the snows, the fires, and the deeps, and he lets out a low and contented sigh. This is a moment of raw and grounded peace. The atmosphere is vibrant and real as the warrior realizes that the true relic was the strength he found in the struggle. You feel the warmth of the sun on your fur and the lightness of the spirit in your heart as you stand at the end of the history. This part of the history is a realization that the great sage equaling heaven was never a title to be taken, but a state of being to be earned through the mud and the blood. The sound of the mountain's heartbeat is now a steady and joyful thrum, making the warrior feel whole and infinite in the center of the world. Deep in the heart of the primal stone, the final moment of the Black Myth takes place in a silence that speaks. The atmosphere is clear and absolute, a realization that the story has no end, only a new voice. This is a story of the continuity of the spirit, where the warrior places his staff upon the ground and watches as it turns into a branch of the world tree. The fight is over, the debt is paid, and the heavens are silent. The sound of the first bird singing on the new peak is a high and perfect note, signaling that the new era has begun. The experience of the Black Myth ends with the destined one sitting on the edge of the highest rock, his eyes closed as he listens to the song of the world. The stone of Hugyu has led to a sovereignty of the heart. He carries the weight of the 6 relics and the freedom of the wind. The atmosphere is one of quiet and absolute completion, a realization that the myth is no longer a story of the past, but a reality of the present. The history of the monkey finds its final and grounded resolution in the breath that fills the lungs, leaving behind the war for a world of peace, spirit, and the journey that will never truly end. The final legacy of the Black Myth is a story of the beauty in the becoming. You have seen the warrior walk through the entire world and find the man within the monkey. You have felt the sting of the elements and the weight of the gods. As the golden light of the final dawn fills your vision and the story of the great sage settles into your bones, you feel a sense of simple and sacred purpose. The journey has brought you back to the stone, but you are no longer the one who started the walk. The mountain is quiet, the sky is open, and the myth is finally yours to carry into the long, peaceful sleep of the world.